step up.
Okay, tell me when you're ready.
All right, welcome back. Today is Friday, September 30th, 2022. We're convened as the Provo City School District Board of Education. We're meeting at the Grandview Technology Center at 1591 North Jordan Avenue, and the time is 12:37 p.m. We'll begin with a roll call. Melanie Hall, Board President.
Rebecca Nielsen, Board Vice President.
Jennifer Partridge, Board Member.
Gina Hales, Board Member.
Terry McKay, Board Member.
McKay Jensen, Board Member.
Keith Rattel, Superintendent.
Derek.
Derek Anderson, Business Administrator.
Is there a motion to convene?
Do we need to excuse Nate?
And we'll excuse Nate Bryson. So, motion to convene?
So moved.
Okay. All right, we are now in our study session. I'm going to turn the time over to Doug Finch, our Assistant Superintendent over Student Services, about the attendance policy.
Thanks, Melanie. Again, just to give you an idea of the context from where we're visiting about today, this is what our third or fourth.
Not sure that's on, Doug.
Okay.
There's a switch on,
just flip it up and it'll turn on.
Working now. How about this one? This one's working. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so this is an ongoing conversation we've been having since the springtime. We've been taking your feedback, and we are working as under the direction of the superintendent to use this school year as a chance to refine some of the work that we're doing in the area of the behavior, conduct of school attendance and engagement. Of note, our last time that the school district updated its attendance policy was 2013, so it's been nearly a decade. And as you read that, you see some language in there that maybe you can sense is a little dated in terms of some of the approach. There's very much probably more of a punitive approach, things that are not up to code with what have been recent legislation around parents' rights with their students with education and so forth. So there certainly is it is a timely moment to look at what we're doing with school attendance. So I'm just going to present for you a little bit of where we're at in that process of revamping and working out an attendance policy and procedure, and give you an opportunity to give me some more feedback today, okay? So one of the things that was some of the concerns that you brought up last time was making sure that we knew what was allowable for us under attendance. So we worked, my office has worked on identifying some of the state Board of Education model policies. You know, when Anne Marie was presenting earlier about some of the library policies, she was working off some model policies that organizations like the USBE or USBA had developed for schools to work off of. And there are some model policies around school attendance that are available as well. So we started there because it had the updates of all of the latest legislation that were in place, including definitions for truancy, how many truant or absences were allowed before a notice of truancy were issued. It had in there some of the criteria of what is an allowable excuse for an absence so that it's not a truancy. It has some updates in there, things such as not requiring medical documentation for doctor's visits. It talked about the ability for students or through their parents to request mental or behavioral health days, et cetera, et cetera. So the document you had in the board docs, it's about 2.5 pages, is a lot of the content of that model policy put in the framework of what an MTSS model would be, the tiered systems of support, right? So the tiered system that you've probably seen before, I think I presented this last year, is the idea that we start with the connection, which was another thing that I have in my notes from last time I visited. Let's make sure we're connecting with families, right? Let's make sure we're connecting with students. So the first out of the gate attempt with this tier 1 is to make sure that teachers and our people who work in the buildings are strengthening, restoring, capturing every opportunity to build relationships with students and their families. So that's the really intent of everything you'll see under this kind of an enhanced, guideline that I've got here as a draft for attendance. So you'll see in here the acknowledgement of let's make sure we're on top of clarifying what was the reason for the absence, right? So they've got that section here that you can see that has those legal, statutory definitions for what is a truancy and what is not a truancy, and what are reasonable excuses that or validations of why a student missed school. You'll see also there some recommendations for the outreach from teachers. Can you send a note home? Can you make a phone call home? Can you let the parent or the student know, I'm missing you in class. You're missing some important content that they're so forth. So that connection with students is one of the first things out of the chute that we're trying to do with the Tier 1 work. As a note, one of the other things that we're doing right now in student services is that we're beginning bi-monthly meetings with all of our school staff who work on attendance. That's our attendance secretaries, administrators who've been assigned to work with attendance. Some cases it's counselors and trackers. We've begun this power hour, and the first one was held this week on Wednesday with our secondary schools, where my staff hosted anyone who wanted to come or virtually participate in a conversation around how is our work around attendance happening. That's, again, an effort to get some feedback on what's the current status of attendance and attendance policy work with the schools. One of the things that was really great to learn from that group, among other things, was that they're making a big effort to really connect. The outreach they're doing, the campaigning of why school matters, it's something that's going to make a big difference. It is important for you to be here. It's mandatory for you to be here again. Compulsory attendance is over. All of our schools have been emphasizing that this fall. And they wanted to kind of, frankly, brainstorm a little bit about what they're seeing some results with. And a lot of our secondary schools were able to share some best practice. They've got some unique ideas at each school, which I love the idea that there's innovation and creativity that are going as they reach out to each of their parent and student groups. But they're beginning to see some results from that. I asked my office staff, for instance, this morning, I'll just insert this now, to run me a little report of what does attendance look like now in most of our schools. In fact, I think they've run me a report here. They were just populating it during lunch for me to finishing the last couple things here. What's the average daily attendance for September of this year compared to September of last year? And these are some of the numbers they have for us for our secondary schools, for instance. A year ago, so September 2021, Independence High School had an average daily attendance of 78%. So far this year, they're at 83%. So you can see a 5% increase in terms of average daily attendance at Independence High School. At this time last year, both Timpview and Provo High School averaged 92% average daily attendance, September 2021. Right now, Timpview High School is at 95% average daily attendance, and Provo High School is at 93%. Both have had somewhat of a measurable increase in average daily attendance. Dixon Middle School was at 91%, and they're currently this year at 93%, a little increase there. And Centennial Middle School was a year ago at 93%. They've just had a slight little nudge here to 94%. So in other words, across the board, our 5 secondary schools are all reporting that they've seen some increases, some more measurable than others, between 1% to 5% increases of average daily attendance as opposed to what we were looking at last year. So it's nice to see that there is some outcomes that they're having from the efforts they're making to connect with families, invite them back, reach out. A lot of the schools have done home visits. A lot of our staff in student services, the student and family advocates have been out trying to take a school staff member with them and connect with the schools that are not sending their kids to school. And I know you had a report a month ago about enrollment numbers being up. I'm grateful that along with enrollment numbers being up as a district that Jason reported to us a month ago, we're also seeing the actual engagement with us increasing a little bit. When you're in those 90 percentiles, that's a much more comforting place to be. And even to see that gain at Independence High School, which typically has been our lower attending location to have gotten the most growth, up to from 78 to 83%, is really encouraging. So that's some of the work that's all part of that Tier 1 that you'll see in the board document that I've offered to you. Then there's Tier 2 that outlines some of the things that we ask the school to do in terms of conferencing. So if you're universal, or generally everyone is getting this invitation to come back to school, feel connected, the relationships, the relevance, the rigor is all there with what happens at the school. There are those individuals who need a little more help, right? So the targeted support that we're going to give at the Tier 2 level outlines for the schools that the invitation expectation that some conferencing will happen. Identifying what are the barriers. In other words, usually attendance is a symptom of another problem, right? Maybe there's something that's going on health-wise. Maybe there's something going with a disconnect. Maybe there's something that's turned into a hostile situation where they just don't feel safe around other kids or around other adults. And we need to unpack that kind of stuff and solve the problems, right? So that is what we call our Tier 2 work. A lot of our schools are utilizing their counselors, their social workers, their school administrators, their PBIS coaches, their deans. All of those individuals are among the staff members who can hold these kind of more individual conferences to use what we call evidence-based practices. And there's a list of them in the Tier 2 that are both from the law as well as what we have received through different training we received of how we can get people to engage when you have to provide a little bit more support to say that 20 or 30% of our kids who are still having a hard time after they get the invitation to come back to school. Then finally, the Tier 3. This is where, again, as was referred to before, I love the little video that such a classic example that was shared by our technology team. The student who felt connected, right, to the esports. Where did that conversation start? It started with the idea I was disengaged. I was not attending, I was not passing, and again, what a great thing that I see that as an example of someone applying the right intervention, probably in one of these type of conference situations, to say, we got him to connect, and his attendance turned around, his connection to the school became really powerful. Tier 3 is where that reference to a attendance court, we've kind of gone away from the terminology attendance court to attendance mediation, because we think that's probably more of a better accurate description of what we're doing in that setting, of trying to mediate at a district level. So my staff, including in many cases myself or one of my directors, meets with the family and the school staff and my student family advocate team to work on the levels of interventions that you see outlined there that are a little bit more intense, right? These are things that perhaps the school doesn't have access to. This could be a referral to youth services, which is a kind of outpouring of the House Bill 239, the Juvenile Justice Reform Bill. That act allowed for the state to save money and develop these individuals who work through DCFS and the juvenile justice reform systems to get into homes and do some work at the home level. What's some of the unpacking of the problems and concerns that might be going on in the home that will remove the barriers to students actively engaging and attending, right? There's also the peer court or the youth court that we can refer to from that Tier 3 level. In other words, at Dixon Middle School, every week or every other week, we hold a peer court of sorts where individuals can go and account for offenses that are kind of either, forts we call status offenses or other things that don't qualify for referral to juvenile court, which really truancy is increasingly getting to where they don't want to see this in juvenile court, but we can handle these sorts of things in a peer court. So the Tier 3 referrals would be there. Let's say the school's concerned about, this is a family who lives way across town or even maybe in another city, and they've school choiced to our location, but they're having a hard time attending. This could be a reason for us to review their choice application again to see if that revocation of that allowance for them to attend out of area is in their best interest to remain or not, or if they're really that distance has become a barrier to them regularly attending and they'd be better off served in their neighborhood school. Those sorts of things are all worked through at the attendance mediation. That's our Tier 3 level. The other examples of what could happen in those areas, including even a referral to a non-judiciary solution through the courts, is also referred to in that section. So anyway, that's the kind of the bigger framework, and that's where we're starting with in working our attendance policy. The other thing that you asked last time, I think Rebecca and others had asked this, is saying, what are the kind of punishments or the encouragements, the incentives? What's allowable for us to do, right? Could we tie this to a student's participation in extracurricular activities, like the ability to go and cheer in an event or play in an event or go on a field trip? Could we tie attendance to that? Could we make it something that's they can't, walk at graduation? They can't do this or that. In other words, need to pay a fine, do service hours, stay after school to an attendance, remediation hour, et cetera, et cetera. I met earlier this week and have a scheduled meeting about every other week here through the month of October with our legal counsel and student services, as the two of us, his name's Morgan Fife, and I are pouring over not only some of this, but also case study that we can find that will give you answers to that over the next month. If a school wanted to implement a truancy class, if they wanted to implement a fine, if they wanted to start attaching this to their participation in extracurricular sports, we're going to identify that allowable list that would be accessible to the schools to have some ability to say, if we're going to do something a little more, say, at Provo High, or we're going to do something a little bit more at Franklin Elementary School or at Dixon Middle School. We want to make sure they've got essentially an approved list of things that they could implement if they wanted to do some things at that tier 1 or 2 level, that they know that when the phone call comes to want to use board members or to the student services, they know it's been a prior approved legal method to motivate individuals for school attendance based on the program they choose to implement. So we're taking all of those ideas that schools are hearing about, that other districts do or schools have done, or we used to do in the past, right? And we're going to legally vet those with our legal counsel so that we've got an idea of what we have as a possibility. You can see, again, my methodology is let's find out all the answers to what the possible constraints are, parameters with attendance before we just pull together a committee and it becomes a kind of a pooling of opinions of what we've heard or seen or want to do with attendance. Once we've got that framework of the do's and don'ts in place so that we know that we're legally sound and statutorily sound, then the next steps, probably around midwinter, early springtime, will be to bring those individuals who can work within here's the parameters, what would you like to have as the school district's ongoing policy and procedure that we're working to renew for the upcoming school year, the 2023-24 school year. I'll pause right there and just ask what kinds of questions or feedback you have for me. Go ahead, Melanie.
I had a constituent reach out to me, and I just need to know if it's legal or not, and maybe something to look into. Can grades be tied, can grades be tied to attendance?
Well, there are some places that are playing with that, and that's one of the questions that we are working toward. This is a conversation, again, it was just last night with our legal counsel. They're in places that are, in other words, taking at the point that someone has, say, an A or B in a class, but then they miss 5 times and changing the grade to a no credit or something like that. Those are practices that have been even recent in our district and other districts. So that's being looked at. That'll be one of the examples of what we're going to see is that a thing that we want to get behind. I think also that challenges some of our philosophies, probably around the idea of standards-based learning. So you got to kind of have to say, are we going to have something competing in this thing that's going to come back and undermine another initiative that we're trying to do right now with standards-based learning? Should it be about seat time to get a grade, or should it be about being able to demonstrate what you know and can demonstrate in that classroom as far as meeting the content? That'll be probably a real healthy debate, right? So I think that the answer probably is, to some degree, there might be allowance for it, but is that something we want to delve into as a district, because it might be competing with something that's a larger goal we have. So I'll make sure that and other things like that are notes that we keep asking questions about.
I have 2 quick questions for you. In section 6 here, under sub-bullet point A, I don't even know if I'm saying that, what constitutes a valid excuse or whatever, it says that you can have a proactive visit to a healthcare provider if the parent submits a written statement at least 1 school day before the scheduled absence. I have never heard of having to put something in a day ahead of time. If I take my kids to the doctor, I just put it on the little sign-out sheet. Is that from statute? Like, is that, that's actual state law?
Yeah, these aren't, this is part of this current state law. So these aren't, what you've got in front of you is what we just pulled out of statute, and it's all cited, right, in the document. So that's a standard that we can, as you've read a little bit above it, the district can determine some things. That's like the whole definition of a prior approved absence, right? A family event or a planned medical appointment. So we're not currently enforcing that as a district, and the question would be as to whether, again, we want to write that into ours or not, to say that's the level of stringency we want to have about someone being able to take their kids to a doctor's appointment. Because earlier on it shows that if you're sick or you're not well, you can go and you don't even have to provide a doctor's note. So there are conflicts within existing statute.
That's what I was just going to say. Isn't it also some new state law that says you don't even have to provide a doctor's note anymore?
Right. You look up the page, and that's there, the 2. Yeah.
So they're totally conflicting.
Yeah. Let me read to you a quote that I took from the attorney last night. He said, "The more I read statute on attendance policy in Utah, the statute has issues."
Okay, that's what I was just kind of curious, like, who said this, because it feels like it's very conflicting,
Right.
So, okay, that's good to know. So one more quick thing, I understand that this is just a gathering of ideas, and that we're working on solidifying this in the future still. So I understand none of this is set in stone, but I just want to make a quick comment. I was just visiting with one of my principals, and she mentioned specifically about attendance, that right now it's very confusing on what they're supposed to do and when, and that every school is kind of doing their own thing. Should we send the letter? Should we not? Some of them are saying, I don't ever send the letter. Some of them are saying, oh, I send that on the 10th absence, no matter what. And there's a lot of inconsistency across the district. I tend to agree with her. If I was in her same position, I would want something a little bit more concrete that doesn't give me, I guess I don't know, but I mean, having this menu that you could choose from seems like it would create a lot of inconsistencies around the district, and really we wouldn't be very successful in sending that attendance is important message if schools are doing this and that and the other. So I would just like to say in the future when we do solidify this that I would really like to see some, I'm not saying choice is bad, but some concrete things maybe before the choices. I don't know exactly how it would play out, but too many choices, like right now in her case, is just really just sending a lot of confusing messages from the district and to the kids and to the parents. When one elementary school does this, but the same family has a kid in junior high and they're doing something totally different. So I would like to see some level of consistency through the whole district. That maybe as a basis and then allows some choice beyond that. I don't know what the right recipe is, but I think we need a little bit more consistency than just letting everything be choice up to each individual school.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for that feedback, and that's why we're working toward trying to create something uniform. If you read this in the section around the Tier 2 section, it names a certain number of days and it names the notice to be sent home. So there might be some confusion by the individual. We just had this training with the principals about 2 weeks ago, and I would expect that there needs to be some reinforcement and some answering some questions for them. So there are some things that we will have some options as a district, right? But there's some things that are in here that are just statutorily
just
expected.
Concrete, right? Okay.
And it's in here, like the idea of after 5 days, the following notice will be sent home.
Okay, good. I'd like to hear that because.
So it's in here, yeah.
Okay, perfect, because maybe we're just not enforcing it very well at this
Right.
point. Maybe that's what the issue is or
That's
whatnot, but
probably
she
more
feels
the
like
issue.
there's just a lot of inconsistency, and she doesn't want to be the bad guy principal who sends out the letter and everybody, but she doesn't also want to be the too lax principal who, so anyways, that's all.
I feel a lot of compassion for that spot she's in, or he's in, wanting to not be the good or the bad person. So, but again, the statutory, there's some things that are in there, but again, I also think that we're utilizing everybody. As I mentioned to you, we're meeting with everyone every other week. So we have a group of elementary staff that come together and a group of secondary, and we're alternating weeks, and we're actually, frankly, using everyone's feedback and ideas of what they're doing in this little space of innovation and what works and is not working to help us devise what should happen. As you can see, I'll go back to it. The state is kind of taking hip shots at this stuff, right? To be honest with you, if you go back 5, 10, 15 years ago, the whole, what would you call it, just the layout in the land about what it is that schools can compel versus what parents have the choice to determine, it's pretty different, right? So the existing statutes are even conflicted. They've got issues, right? So making sense of them, which was your first request. Let's be legal with whatever we're going to do as a district, right? So that's the effort we're trying to make. And it's not black and white, even from a state standpoint, what you should do. So we are finding we're going to be in this space where we're going to try and pick our spots with some limited, but some flexibility within different schools or different systems to work out what they want to do locally. But yeah, we don't want to leave people in this spot that the state has created for us of, is there compulsory ed or is there not? Is there going to be enforcement or is there not? As we reach out to both of our cooperating agencies, both DCFS and the courts, here's their quote. We don't have much of an appetite to take this on as other agencies to do something with it. So we hope the school district figures this out. Because really, our support is going to sunset. It was supposed to sunset in 2022, but it got extended 4 or 5 years by the legislature. But it's going to sunset. As outside agencies, we really want this to be your thing. So it really is important that we take the time to figure out what our thing is, because other agencies seem to be wanting to say, we're out of this, let there be local input and control on this. So it is timely for us to spend the time and try and do it right. But thank you for that feedback about giving good direction. McKay?
So in addition to sort of the punitive side, could we sort of make a conscious effort to look at, we just had a great example of esports.
Yeah.
could we send somebody up to Jordan and talk about unified sports? Is there a way that we could find more connecting opportunities? I mean, again, as an online educator, I would really like to see more opportunities for participation and less sort of million-dollar competition, but more participation. How do we get more people in other things that we can say, well, your grades have to be this way to do this, but if there was a formula that maybe someone in the nation has come up with, that if you spend this much on activities, you get this much engagement, or is there something beyond just legal recourse? What do we get to hold people out? How do we encourage? How do we get people to like school?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that was such a great case example, wasn't it? When you think
Yeah.
about everything around that was someone from who was really turned off, didn't feel connected, to then felt extremely connected, wants to do their best.
So the best stat of our whole morning was, I was expecting, this is our e-school team, or our esports team, and I was expecting 9 students or 11, like the Science Bowl or something, right?
Okay.
And here's this big group that looked like it could get bigger.
Yeah, you heard it. You heard what's the scarcity about that expanding? It wasn't a student interest, right?
Right.
It was like, we need a space and we need a passionate advisor. And we get those two things. There's another grundle of kids who probably feel a little disillusioned from all types of backgrounds, who will show up and have this really powerful connection to school and feel very motivated to be there. I said that's the vein we want to get into as much as we can on this work. I'd agree with you, McKay. Thanks for that feedback. So we'll continue to pursue that. Jennifer.
Yeah, a couple things. So first of all, I think back to communication with the schools. I heard from a parent in my area recently who she was told, I don't know if it was the nurse or the health clerk, but they were told that if your kid misses more than 5 days, you need a doctor's note. And she was really frustrated because her kids just keep sharing illnesses with each other. And I told her that's not the case. And just so that communication there, maybe we need to revisit. Also, I wasn't quite clear with this document you shared with us is if this is going to turn into our procedure or whatever, but based on what you said and what I know of you and of our district, it doesn't yet reflect all the things that we want to do with the connection building, the relationships. There's little mentions, but I would definitely love to see more verbiage on that aspect.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I know that's really important to you, and you're the one who gave me that feedback the time before, and I've hung on to it. That you said, in fact, it was in 2 different parts of your feedback: connect, and then somewhere else, connect. And so I agree with you that's the emphasis. And frankly, it's my mentality about it. It's hard to just say that you can just directly punish people straight on attendance when attendance really is a symptom of another problem. And when you connect with them, you find out what perhaps is the barrier that they're struggling with to engage with us. And it becomes less about attendance and removing that other barrier. This might be relationship, might be activity, it might be health, it might be. So yeah, moving into kind of a higher arena of saying it really is about us, and it's about inclusion, and it's about us celebrating what the opportunities we have for our future, and this being a community where we see each other in Provo. I agree with you a lot, so thank you. That is the intent. Thanks for judging us well, that this is just really a working document you're looking at, where we're putting policy and statute together. We're trying to get a feel so that people can be up to date and participate and engage this school year on how to refine it, that it's a real workable, clear, but has also that space for creativity that a lot of our innovative principals want to maybe perhaps do something unique to them. Back to the idea of some of the low-hanging fruit about eligibility to participate. You kind of see so that was a way that through UHSA and others, people want to get their grades and attendance right. That is a low-hanging fruit group, right? To just say if you're going to be able to participate, you get your grades right, which often means get your attendance right. And so to be on one of those teams, it is really easy to have this be an enforceable code of conduct to be on one of the teams. But we also know that there's a lot of folks that also don't participate, either don't feel engaged or invited or interested in these activities that we have formal teams around, and therefore it leaves them out if we say, well, we're just really after all the athletes or the e-gamers or the drama team or the band kids to make sure they're attending. We want to make sure this is really equitable. This is, if we're going to put effort, we want to put effort to all, to helping them feel like that this is support for them doing well in school. So no, thanks for that feedback. Anything else? I want to try and keep us on schedule a little bit, but I know that Keith had mentioned that this would be an ongoing conversation we wanted to have. Your feedback as we go along the way will help me and my team not get off in a different direction you don't want us to go. So beyond what was shared with me, I've taken some notes, and I'm sure Bonnie has too. If you want to reach out to me with emails as follow-up to help make sure that I'm guiding the ship in the right direction, please be sure to do so.
If you could tell the board, what is your end date, and what do you hope to have done by that end date?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Keith. So again, just as far as phasing on this, we're working to put together a committee of multiple different representative groups during the winter months, with an idea that probably in the springtime, probably late winter, early spring, I'd say probably a February or March board meeting, we'd probably be presenting to you a draft policy procedure that we would hope to be able to have in place and people trained up to utilize for the upcoming school year, the 2023-24 school year. So that sound like a reasonable timeline from your perspective,
Sounds
Keith?
consistent with what you and I've talked about, yes.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, good work.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Doug. All right, next we're going to discuss dress code concerns. If Todd McKee and Alex Judd want to come up.
Could you introduce it, because?
Yeah. So I was approached by a facilitator that they're concerned that, you know, what is our dress code here? And do we have a policy? Is there dress codes? How do we enforce it? Do we want to enforce it? What's going around? I think it was West High School just pulled their dress policy. Do you know, Keith?
I don't know.
I know there was one in the state that just pulled theirs because they felt like it's more important that the kids are coming to school than worry about what they're wearing or whatnot. So I just want to have this discussion to say, is this something we want to have on the books? Because if we're going to have a policy, either we're going to enforce it or not, type of a thing.
We currently have a policy and it says the schools get to decide. So,
Yeah.
do we
But
want
again,
a broader policy?
Do we want a broader policy, or do we need to have more direction for them, that type of thing? So
Alex and Todd have done some checking just to find out what's going on out in the schools. So that's probably where this discussion begins, is
Sure.
in terms of what you found out.
provide the board with, first, good afternoon. I can provide the board with a general survey of what the secondary schools are doing, and I know that Alex has done similarly with his elementary schools. You know, it really somewhat runs the gamut. In the 5 secondary schools, we do have one school that's simply deferred completely to the board policy, which is rather general and vague, all the way to where schools are getting very specific about different attire, including length of shorts or skirts, width of straps on the shoulders. So that does exist out there. Every school is a little bit different, though. I think if there was one common element among the secondary schools, is they all seem to include language around ensuring that whatever attire they're wearing, a student is wearing, it should not include anything that's vulgar, violates law, promotes drugs or alcohol, or is gang related. So that's a consistent thread, but it really is across the gamut as you go across the 5 different schools.
And is mine on? With elementary, one of the biggest challenges that they run into is that they run the gamut of such a young age, kindergarten, preschool, to 6th grade, and the development of those kids in that process is much different. And so it really becomes a little bit of a trick as to how you navigate some of the clothing attire, because it changes dramatically in those years. One of the pieces that the principals have noted is that they're really not wanting to be the police of attire, and that it's hard because you want to make sure that there's nothing that's going to distract or take away from the learning environment. and yet sometimes that happens, and so they have to be able to address that. Most of the principals are saying as long as it's not distracting from the school or from the learning environment, they're not going to try to make an issue about it. One of the concerns that one of the principals did bring up was that in creating a policy or creating dress code, it oftentimes becomes something that can immediately be turned into some type of sexualization of women, and they want to be careful that they never go there, because it's really critical that they say everybody should feel safe and welcome in their school at all times. They don't want kids to feel like they can't come to school because of somebody wearing attire that would make them uncomfortable, but they also want people to not come to school because they're wearing inappropriate clothing either. So that's that tension that they're wrestling with. Let's see, another quote. A couple of things, if you want to look at Mark Burge's policy, there's one that he's got on his website. Spring Creek has one on their website, as well as Rock Canyon. And again, in each of those, they've really tried to tease out and just say, be wise and conscious in your decisions of clothing. Don't wear anything that's abusive, like abusive language, or any thing that would represent alcohol or drugs or anything of that nature. But most of the time, they're really trying to just say, just wear clothing that covers from here to your mid-thigh and leave it alone. And that's what they really are trying to ask that they do in all the schools. Let's see if there's any other key things. One of the other pieces here is that as long as it doesn't distract from any learning environment, they're good to go. The shorty shorts are really becoming a challenge right now, and so that's the thing that they're just trying to figure out, where do I find that balance and support the schools or the students.
So let me add a couple of perspectives here. And I say this is not only in my current role, but former high school principal. When we talk about dress code, unfortunately, most of the time it tends to focus on girls. And for that reason and that reason alone, if you are a male administrator in a building, it is potentially dangerous for you to want to go up and talk to a girl about the way she's dressed. And I have to tell you, I got to the point where I felt the way that, assuming it was West High, the West High principal was, I mean, I'd rather have them there than not have them there. And I'm not going to make a big fuss about how they're dressed. Now, there are some people who don't agree with that standard. That's fine. But the reality is, you're not going to go and talk to a girl who may be dressed a certain way. You're not going to talk to her in public. You take her into a room, to your office, just the two of you, then you're talking about her, potentially about her appearance and dress, and that can be inappropriate as well. So this is a very, very delicate area. And I'm not blaming anybody when I say this, but parents buy the clothes for kids because they're what's on sale or because they're what's in fashion. And I don't think the girls are necessarily coming to school with the intention of trying to display their bodies a certain way. They're just trying to dress with what is out there being sold to them. So going to a very stringent dress code sounds good on paper, sounds good for some people who aren't in it up to their eyeballs. But if you are a high school administrator or anybody who works in a high school and you are asked to contend with this issue, it is really perilous to do that. And it's not because I don't have any courage, it's because I don't really want to have a conversation that focuses on somebody's looks, who's a member of the opposite sex. It's easy. Honestly, my experience with being a high school principal, it was easy with boys because usually it was a beer ad or it was a marijuana ad or it was something like that. There was sagging and bagging of the jeans and all, but those were easier for me to address. But if this really is a girl issue, that creates some real problems. So.
It's also an equity problem for staffing, because that's often a female staff member. You handle this all the time. You are the bad person. You go and do this all the time, or
No question.
that then their relationship with the student that might be struggling otherwise is also impacted, unfair that they're, and so I like the illegal distraction standard that can be applied, male and female. Is this a distraction or not?
The easiest standard, in my experience in the high school, similar to the superintendent, the easiest standards are health, safety, or complete disruption to the learning environment. Those are the only standards you really have firm ground to stand on.
I know
Otherwise,
this, go ahead.
yeah,
finish.
otherwise you've got, just like we ask parents to trust us, we have to trust parents. There's got to be a partnership there. As the superintendent said, you know, they're providing the clothing for their children and sending them out the door to us. And we have to work in relation with them.
And if that is also the standard, I would also hope that we train you, that we have not, that we then have some training on distraction or appropriate for our educational environment, not just, I say it's distracting.
Correct.
I'm uncomfortable.
That's right.
But that's for our staff to work on. But as far as the students, this is the standard.
That's correct.
I know Keith wants to say something. Can I piggyback on his
No,
real quick?
you go right ahead.
I have to agree with that, because who is it a problem for, would be my question. If a person is showing up, who is this a problem for? And it is, like, as soon as I saw dress code on there, I was like, oh, great. And then and I've thought a lot about it, and I've asked people, and it's directed at girls, and I mean, this is just fraught. And so I guess I agree with what McKay is saying and what you have said. We're putting the burden onto female staff. We're putting the burden onto girls. I don't want it to be a problem. I don't want I only have girls. I don't want my daughters to show up at school in something that is distracting. But is that my problem? Whose problem is that? And so I feel like we're starting to get into the territory where some think that we need to own, like, I don't know, we're owning other people's stuff. And it's not my, and it bothers me, sorry, now I'm going off, Keith. You can have the mic in just a minute. But it bothers me, and I was looking through some things. I can't remember if it was an email I got. I've gotten some feedback about this. But we have teachers who check the length of hems on skirts. This is happening in 2022. They are measuring, maybe they don't have a ruler out, but they are looking at the straps. Why are we doing that to our teachers? And why are we doing it to our kids? Just a whole host of issues. And again, it's targeted at girls. And whose problem is this? I personally, my daughter had on a pair of shorts that you couldn't see bums, but it was getting up there, and she's only 8 or 9. And I told her to go change, and she didn't understand it. So I personally send my kid in things that are longer. I make her wear longer things. But if another kid has sent that, and she says, well, they wore that, and I'm like, that is not your problem. You need to, you and I need to figure it out. We need to stop relegating what's our own issues with things onto other people and making other people change so that we are comfortable with things. And that's it. Sorry.
I was just going to make kind of a flippant comment, but it's an honest comment. When I was a high school principal, I wanted rain in June. Okay? The colder the spring was, the more people would wear it. And then all of a sudden, this wasn't an issue. So, but when we have warm weather, it's a hard thing to manage because the clothes do come off.
To Board Member McKay's point, though, about disruption and what is a disruption for one, is that technically a disruption for the school? It's interesting that there's been current court decisions about defining just that. It was around the area of free speech for students. But, it's helping our staff and our administrators understand, because it creates maybe a little bit of a buzz for 15 minutes, is that clearly a disruption to the learning environment, as opposed to something that lasts for the entire week, where all the kids are abuzz for an entire week. I mean, my point being is that we've got to define that for them, as opposed to allowing them to simply interpret it on their own. Otherwise, we end up where we have 18 schools doing 18 different interpretations.
Something I have heard of, I haven't seen it in action, but short of requiring uniforms, there are schools in the country who have really promoted the idea of when you come to school, it's a business-like environment. And so as a business-like environment, we want people to dress accordingly. How that works at the elementary level, Alex, I have no idea.
Again, I think that's great, except for, you know, it gets into all these decisions we make are hard, and people are, because I think of, we're talking about school start times, and we can't move start times because practice starts, or they're getting ready to go to the basketball game. So if they're getting ready to go to the basketball game and they're wearing their warm-up, are they in violation of the dress code? Now I'm talking about
Right.
attendance or this.
Right.
We have limited time. We can do everything we want to do. We can't do everything. We can do anything we want to do, but we can't do everything. We have limited time. Yes, should the principal have some discretion to say, this is a distraction in my classroom. This is a point you're making. You know, if that's you know, a Michael Myers mask, this is distracting and not conducive. This is, if that's a KKK hat, that this is my free speech. No, this is distracting to the educational environment. I get to comment. But that should be our standard, and we have to be, and I agree that our schools need to be, you have a uniform, like, understanding of what that is. We need to train our staff, but in all the things that we're asking our kids to do, getting them to come to school is number one. And then after that, having it be a comfortable place, and then a better educational environment, and, you know, width of straps or length of skirt or rulers when it comes to clothes should be way down that list.
I think this is the general idea of what you're talking about, giving a general guideline of what we expect, work with our principals to make sure that we're clearly teasing out some of those things. Elementary is a lot easier to navigate than secondary, which I'm grateful for. Yet at the same time, there are still, I mean, a kindergartner wearing a spaghetti strap at school is going to be fine, whereas somebody that may wear it that's more mature might be a little bit more complicated, and helping teachers know how to navigate some of those things, because to your point, putting a lot of this on teachers can be really complicated.
We're going to have to do some training to give teachers courage in that situation. It's also harder when an unprepared family sends their kid with, you know, the Coors Light shirt to first grade, and no one's home to change. But not disrupting that or making that student feel unwelcome at school because that was the best shirt he had, that happens too.
Yeah.
So being human about that, and
In the past, that student would receive a school T-shirt, so they'd have some school pride, and we'd ask
Great.
them to change.
Oh, so that's the way to get free swag.
Just come on by, Gina, we'll take care of it.
but you know, finding in that, and I don't think it's a bad thing to reemphasize that we want kids in school, and we want people to be patient as we navigate this human experience.
And I think that was the sentiment of most of the principals, is that they're not going to make an issue out of something as long as it's not distracting from the learning environment.
So can I address the elephant or be the devil's advocate or whatever? The only issue I foresee maybe, is figuring out what happens when, since we're going to a really broad definition of what our dress code is, or maybe heading that direction or whatever, when a principal does want to enforce something for being distracting or whatever, and the child or the parents argue back and object, then what's our procedure there? How do we back up principals or parents or students? Because since it's so subjective,
Well,
what do we do when
need-
conflict arises?
Thank you for the question. I think we have to take that subjectivity and make it more specific and concrete. You know, I talk about health, safety, and disruption. Well, health, you can get really concrete. Students should wear shoes. I mean, that's an example. But we have to be that detailed in our examples to help them navigate this. You know, safety, gang-related, promotion of violence, hate speech, those things start to cross the line around safety. And so we have to be able, again, provide real clear, concrete examples for schools and for families so they can navigate that. You know, the disruption, that's the one we have to do a lot of training around to help people understand what that entails, and I think that's where a lot of this gets defaulted to. So I think the conversation's appropriate, given that our schools are all over the board in terms of how they're implementing this, and that's causing confusion in the community. In the end, to your point, we have to work with our families. We have to develop that partnership and that trust that goes both ways. And you know, in the end, if they really want to push on us, we've got to figure out why is that the case. It's never been an easy process, but I think that's the right course of action that we have to take.
Derek's got it.
Derek?
Just a quick question, what if we have, say, somebody that disagrees with the clothing, because those guys, they are the ones that decide to create disruptions and to just try to create an issue out of this. So you end up having somebody who wants to create an issue.
I mean, I think it's a good question. I don't know how to respond to that directly because in my years of working through this, I've never had anyone push me to that limit, right? And once you explain and show concrete examples, most everyone I can think of has been willing to work with you.
And I would agree with that. That's where most of the parents in our community are trying to create that learning environment that's best for kids. And as long as you can find that common ground to work from, I've never had a situation that I couldn't work through with a parent.
And when it comes to that, do they disagree? When do we back up I think the board has to back up the principal when the principal says, I've met with so-and-so's parents. And we have to back up the parents when they go, the principal says, we want to have a conversation about this, and the parent says, this is what I want to send my kid to school in. If we're going to back up the parent to say, I don't want my kid to read that, and we're going to back up the parent there, when a parent says, this is what I want to send my kid to school in, we have to back up the parent. We have to back up the parent in some senses. We have to back up the principal when it comes to some child that is not their own, but do we back parents or not?
Well, to that point, if the foundation is health, safety, and disruption, are we really willing to move the line on that and soften our stance?
Yeah.
And that was rhetorical.
I totally dislike this entire topic. But I will just say a viewpoint that hasn't been said yet. I totally get and understand what has been expressed and agree with a lot of it. I'm frustrated generally as a society that we have become so casual in things and that people want to go shopping in clothing that used to be considered underwear. A crop top that barely shows a little bit compared to one that looks more like a bra. I mean, there are lines, and I feel as a society we need to do a better job of, but I don't know how you handle that in a school and keeping in mind that different families have different values and things like that. I do like what the example that was here from Provo Peaks of what they show their families, and if there's a way we could do something like here's a recommendation or speaking to the professionalism of you coming to school, do your best, not that we're going to nitpick, not that we're going to look at lengths of shorts or crop tops or things like that, but I do think it's okay to have a standard.
And I think to that point, teaching what appropriate behavior in the work, in the professional setting would be for a student, and continue to promote that and use it as a teaching moment for them. I think that absolutely we should be putting energy into that. I think the question though is where do we start to draw the line in terms of removing kids, issuing consequences to kids. I think that's where we're just trying to say at what point do we remove a kid from a class for because of their clothing.
Right, and I'm not advocating for for doing all those kinds of things, but I do think it's
But
okay to
it-
say that this is our dress code, that we
To-
would like you to,
And to your point, I
Work
think
towards.
this is true with everything. There's two sides to the coin, right? There's the consequence that we want to avoid, but then there's the positive of trying to reinforce and teach so that kids moving forward know what is appropriate going forward.
So would the board like us to perhaps play around with a way to enhance our board policy, giving some examples?
I personally,
Or do we leave it alone?
I personally feel like it needs to be a uniform policy across the board for everybody, because I think this is where it's happening. Well, at one school, they're not doing it, but at another school, they are, and so then there's creating conflict there too.
So I agree with that. One thing to think about as you're, and I think we're moving in the right direction, but one thing to think about is at my daughter's elementary, Title I, I don't think those kids shop for their clothes. I think they get them donated to them. And so as we put together the policy, and I agree it needs to be uniform, I just want to make sure that we have different parts of town who have different levels of income, that we're taking into account that we got some kids who show up in clothes that someone, and I'm thinking more elementary, I'm not sure about secondary, but these elementary kids, they're showing up in clothing that has obviously been worn for 3 generations. And I want to make sure that we are very cognizant of the fact that a lot of these kids don't shop for their own clothes. And that if we're going to put it in place, what's best for this school over here and what's attainable for this school here may not be attainable for the other schools. As long as, and I understand that you guys, I am not mad at you. I just want us to be very deliberate in our thinking about this. Not that you guys wouldn't be, this is also for the public who are watching. We need to be very deliberate, and we need to be very conscious of the fact that some of these kids aren't choosing these things, and that putting one thing in place in one part of town doesn't have any, it's not going to do any ripples, but it might ripple over where I live.
I think it's a serious concern if we're treating kids differently based off geography.
I think maybe, Gina, one way to address that issue is, I'm going to suggest an assignment for you guys. As you hold your principal-based PLCs, probably pull them, because each individual school principal is, as you know, very in touch with what the school community represents and what they can do and what they can't do, and what is appropriate for that particular community. That might be a place to start in terms of kind of a commonality standard. You guys, in consultation with the principals, you'll have to determine whether there should be a different approach for secondary as opposed to elementary.
Yeah, and I would also just say, look at those 3 examples that I put in that Google Doc for you, and then just kind of give me some feedback from your perspective, because as I visit with the principals and have this conversation, I want to make sure that I'm representing kind of this idea, the tension that Jennifer just talked about with the standards that we want to have, while at the same time representing the community that may need to be considered in that they may not be buying their clothes. So anyway, give us that feedback, and then as we work with principals. That has happened.
To Keith's question a minute ago, I'm looking at our current procedure, and it doesn't have the specific language that you guys have continued to say about, if it references drugs or alcohol, so I do think we definitely need to update the procedure with some of those specifics.
That's a fun project for you 2 gentlemen.
But
And my guess is that Doug is going to be so anxious to become part of that discussion, he will join you.
All right, are there further questions on that? All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn the time over now to Derek Anderson, our business administrator, and he's going to talk about our remaining ESSER funds.
Okay, so, right now, with our current ESSER funding, we have right now, based off of the way everything has landed, what people have spent in the past or did not, or turned back over to the district, saying that, hey, we're not gonna be able to use this anymore. As of right now, we have $3.2 million available that has not been tagged for anything, or has been released back from the original plans. Right now, what you can see here is below the line of this orange line is those are requests that have come in since we've kind of said, hey, what things do we want to start, considering for these additional funds that have been kind of released back. And is it too much in the?
Thank you.
Thank you. No, we
I'm
just.
too darn far away. I have
It's-
no idea.
I
what
just
that
couldn't
says.
read it.
I appreciate
Sorry,
it.
all right.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
and the ones that are below are the ones that have kind of come in afterwards saying, hey, we're interested in this. So English language curriculum material, they've asked for that. There's going to be some need there. So the temp U boilers and fire line, we've gotten some estimates on that. Currently, right now in the project, there's no plans to replace the boiler or the fire line in temp U. And if we want that school to continue to last for 50 years, we've just got to replace that. It's at the end of their life. And so my proposal is that we use $2 million of this to replace the boiler and to replace the fire line. The other thing we went and did is, because we can use these funds for boilers and HVAC systems and things like that, they opened that up to that. We went around and we have about almost $1 million, $750,000 of HVAC needs around the district that are all needing to be replaced or are in serious need of repair. So our team went around and they did a big assessment on all of the HVAC systems and boilers. There's also another boiler that we're getting a quote on right now. It is the elementary Timpanogos. Thank you, Timpanogos. Timpanogos Elementary's boiler. While that's a brand new elementary, the boiler and is not compatible with the system that was installed apparently, and it's completely rotted out extremely early. So we've got to replace that boiler apparently. So that boiler, looks to probably be around $250,000 because it's at an elementary. So that's not on here, but I would propose that we replace that one too. So if we take $250,000 off of that, we've got about $3 million.
Derek, can you just review for everybody the restrictions on the ESSER dollars, please?
Yep. Learning loss and these capital. So it's not for new buildings or it's not for things like that. It is specifically, they've opened it up for like your HVAC, your boiler, your mechanical type systems, okay? So that's
part of that was, remember when COVID first came out, the big concern was let's make sure that the air is clean in our buildings. So that's why this was all rooted in that.
Bingo, correct.
But a boiler counts in that?
Yeah, a boiler does count
Because it's
toward
the
that.
heating.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Derek, real quick, one more quick question. When was Timpanogos built? It's like a 15-year-old school, am I right?
Correct.
15 years ago.
So what's the average length of a boiler?
About 40 years.
But they used the existing boiler, is that what you're telling us?
No, the boiler that was put in there was not compatible with the other system that was put in there. So the two systems, the design when it was designed and installed, were not compatible.
And we just are just catching this now.
Correct. So, as of right now, we've got about $3 million we can do some additional things on. I've got an email out to the state about opening up some potentially other things that might be there, just to see if there's other categories that they have not disclosed on, because we do have other needs around the district. If you look right here, these are the capital projects that were cut just recently for this last year. And you can see we've got the Centennial Cafeteria renovation expansion. We may be able to say, hey, this is to help give our students more space. Can that be qualified? So I'm gonna reach out to the state, see if that could be considered. We've got the Franklin and Amelia Earhart roofs that need to be re-roofed. You can see down below, you've got some playgrounds. My guess is those probably won't qualify, but then there's the restroom flooring and grinding. These ones, I'm a little more skeptical that they would ever qualify, but the Centennial, that one might, and the re-roof, I could see potentially them allowing it, but even then, I mean, yeah, that if all three of those got approved, that's still, I mean, that's about the $3 million, but if that's not, might want to consider other things. There's other things that has been discussed. There was potentially looking at some stipends to help kickstart and train our teachers on.
You want me to speak about that?
Yes, please.
The idea of incentivizing our staff to really implement Chromebook technology in their classrooms. You know, one of the things that we've been concerned about is that even with Susie pushing, and she's got a lot of good things going on in this area, if we could encourage our teachers in particular to, say, take on a project of, here's something I want to try or will try in my classroom, using the technology that we've invested in, and then if they can demonstrate that with a principal and maybe somebody from the Learning Initiative going in and just seeing it in operation, checking it off, then they qualify for some type of stipend or bonus or something. And we're thinking that that could be a second semester, end of the year thing, something that would get them into, get a stipended bonus as they go into summertime. This is kind of my idea. I like the idea of giving another reason why you want to use these resources that we've purchased over the last few years. My worry is that we do have a few classrooms around the district where they're simply sitting in their carts and they're not being used, and all they're doing is getting older. So if we can incentivize that a little bit through teacher usage of these materials, that is definitely a way to, as a hedge against learning loss. So it's one idea that I feel pretty strongly about.
How much money are we talking, like, would be an incentive for each teacher?
It depends on how much we have left over and how much we want to send their way. I mean, generally speaking, we've done incentives in the neighborhood of between $1,000 and $1,500. Excuse me, bonuses. We don't call them bonuses, but you know what I mean. In that range. So, but this would also be something that there may be individuals who don't want to do it. So, but it may be a way of us really putting that massive investment of Chromebooks and other technology to a slightly better use than what we're getting right now.
And that would, for about 1,000 to 1,500 per teacher, that's going to be about $1 million to $1.5 million.
So that, sorry, just to be clear, that balance of $3,237,000 is with.
This is as of right now with just these three things added in. That's what's left. If we want to go and consider Centennial, right? Or what was that? Sorry.
It's about $3 million because we need to add in the Timpanogos boiler too.
So that balance includes those projects, right? So we're saying if we go ahead and do those projects, we still have $3 million. Okay. Got it.
And it has to be used by a year from now.
Okay.
So we would want to start moving really quickly.
So you just want some direction on what we want to do with the extra $3. I always like doing something for the teachers. If we could do that, I think that would be a really great thing to do.
I think a hybrid approach. We've got some significant capital needs.
So,
and then we also, I mean, have educational
needs.
needs.
The state is going to look really closely at that program too, to go, how is this you just not making them pay for stuff that they were doing? How did this directly address learning loss? I mean, just the nature of the design of that program is going to put a really high burden on Jason and student services to go, this is how this addressed learning loss, because they're going to look at that really closely. I think that some of the capital things they'll view it as, well, we told you yes or no up front. And this, we're like, well, how did that address learning loss? There might be data collection that I don't know if we're ready to do. I mean, it just, so I like the idea, just know that there might be a bit more to that. It's gonna be a red flag audit right off the start. Now let's look at this. What data did you have going in? What data do you have coming out? And, you know, we have, uh, the trick always in education is with one-time funds, but our district is unique, in a unique position. We're about ready to change over. Why wouldn't we do a huge, in-depth, pay a group that maybe is in our district to engage with our public and say, what does your kid need? I mean, this is the learning loss that we can measure, but if we engaged our public all the way through and we paid a firm, we paid, and what is your, and we use that as a benchmark. Coming out of COVID, we're taking a direction, but we did, you know, not just a survey, but almost a at-will, house-to-house, what does your student need? In some way, even if that's $100,000 or $200,000. I think it's an opportunity for our district, and the things that we're trying to communicate with our parents. Our parents want to have input into it. You know, some want to have input into our schools, want to know what's happening in our schools. What does this student need? I mean, we're not asking parents a lot. We're relying on our tests and everything else. So we might look at that as a waste, but I don't know if it's a waste for our district at the moment.
So you're saying like fun to study, right?
Yeah, fun a genuine, you know, information gathering bit from our community. Not focused on our teachers in schools, but focused on their kids. What do your kids need? So, and what do they see as the deficit? I mean, the tricky part about that is we have to be able to be prepared to act on the data. And if we get 60% that said we need more mental health, well, you know, that's gonna impact budget discussions, but maybe it should impact budget discussions. You know, so finding out. I mean, I think I don't think it's $3 million, but I think it's, if we wanted, what is our learning loss? What's our social emotional learning loss? We only get that from engagement with our families, and let's engage our families. Our community says we don't do that enough.
It's an interesting thought. Are there other things we could use to get us that data? I mean, we have things kind of in place, but is it getting us, are we just not happy with the data we're getting?
A survey. Everything is a sample size versus, you know, really
testing, you know, it's a sample versus.
the sample versus, and it's a guess. And everybody says, oh, I don't know. I have the opportunity because we don't have the money to go beyond the sample.
Well, we do have test scores of where the students are on academic metrics.
Yeah, but there's no high-stake test on my kid likes school.
Right.
Derek, is summer school for next year up on there?
That
I
was
don't
my
see it.
question, was summer school.
No, summer school is out between the files, and we discussed that it was coming off of it.
Could be added
I
in
mean-
with that amount of money we
This
have.
has to be spent by what, May or June of next year?
No.
September 30th.
To get this.
September 30th.
So
That
there's a
might be good.
possibility the foundation is in a position to, again, with the great fundraising we've done, right, with last year's auction and so forth, we're not necessarily in a, you know, a lacking situation financially to continue programs that we've done previously. But again, it's another place the money could be allocated.
Do we have any data? Has it been helping? Have the summer programs been helping? Do we know anything about, I think we had this discussion, right? It's difficult to get the data. Was that what we decided?
There's usually not a lot of data it's a big educational impact. It's a way to continue to engage your public, to provide services, to provide food, to provide daycare. A lot of studies longitudinally have said that you get really small return academically, but again, not that academics is what you're after. You just state your vision is to continue to reach out to the community. The secondary model, Todd can speak up a little bit more because it is pointed toward credit recovery.
It's all credit recovery, so there is a tangible benefit to summer school for secondary students.
So off the top of your head, do you know if it's been helping?
It has been helping as we look at where students are at the end of May graduation and then what we end up seeing by September 30th. I couldn't put my finger on the exact number, but it is measurable.
I would advocate for that, for some summer school fund, or at least looking at that.
I've got two things. So first of all, the ESSER funds, is it restricted to new things to address learning loss, or can we put it to some things we've already been doing and then move money towards those facility needs?
So that is correct. It can be used for existing programs and things like that. That is correct. So we can't.
So what's underfunded? What are we doing that's effective, that's underfunded?
What's not underfunded?
Yeah.
That's the problem, is what's underfunded, but we don't get it again, so.
Yeah, we don't get it again.
Can I put in one more plug? I don't know if everyone's gonna hate me for this too, but, and I mean, obviously there needs to be a balance in what we use the money for, but I would love to take care of as many capital needs as we can, so that we can free up potential capital funds in the future for the Dixon building. We need to decide what we're gonna do with it, and I'd like to keep it and do something great with it, and that's looming. And so if we can take care of other capital needs right now, so that more capital funding is freed up for that in the future, that's also something that I see as a benefit for us.
I'd like my daughter to be warm in the winter, and she goes to Timpanogos, but that's a personal request, so just disregard it. I'll just send her with lots of clothes that are appropriate.
That are safe and not hazardous, not
That
distracting.
don't have logos on them that are violent or promote drug use.
I agree with that about the capital. Another idea I had is I see we've got some staffing and stuff on here already. I had heard from a person in our community recently who had been like a hourly instructional coach, and she was telling me that position's up in the air right now because not sure if there's enough funding, and I hadn't had the time to delve into that with you about that. But I mean, if that's a need that we have for more instructional coaches to help our teachers be more effective, I think that would be a great use of money as well.
So that's the first I've ever heard of any position that has been in trouble due to any funding structure. So that is.
Sorry to throw that out.
No, you're good. Okay. So they do have, there are funding things and things like that people have funded with grants. That's every grant position across the district is essentially in that position, because grants are always
Okay.
one-time money. And so you always, anytime somebody's hired with a grant, that's essentially a standard thing that you usually tell them, saying, this is a position that is paid for by a grant. If that grant ever goes away, so does the position. But typically most grants are ongoing. This ESSER one is going to be one of the first big ones, like big ones that will have a cliff.
So would it be okay with the board if we take some of these ideas and probably it would be Derek and Jason and I work together to see what we can craft in terms of spending of this amount, and then bring it back to you as a plan, probably in a month or two? Is that okay for you as a direction?
We would do much better at choosing between options than coming up with them on our own.
Yeah.
Although there have been some really good ones that have been proposed, so let's see what we can do. McKay, do you have somebody in mind for the study that you were thinking? You're thinking Quinn Monson again?
Yeah, that, or I don't know. I mean, I wonder if you could see the Department of Education and say, hey, we're willing to pay this. You send this many students. What do they do with students? And they, maybe they get half tuition to become teachers, and yeah, it's only gonna happen this one year, but you'll get half tuition this semester, and now you're in a teaching program. There might be some external benefits. I mean, it just might be something that you could find from UVU, or just by doing a little thought and saying who would want to do this and have students do it.
There are some groups, Keith, that have helped other cities. I think of Ogden City and others who have
Yeah.
done these kind of needs assessments. They've done it in cooperation with like the United Way to try and identify where are the needs within the community. And I know that we've utilized a lot of that data for grant writing, et cetera. So we had a conversation a month ago about the SHARP survey, how that's a source of information for us, but yet we're kind of a little up in the air as to whether we're going to participate. So finding something that could be a way that some of the board members reached out to me and said, can we send another survey out if we decide not to go with SHARP? I really think there's a lot of viability to what is suggested here. And there's a lot of vendors out there that we probably don't know of, but there are people who do this pretty regularly in cities and organizations to come in and kind of fleece or go door to door and get the information that you want. We've also talked about inclusion. We have an inclusion statement that we've developed as a district, and with that sometimes comes a need to audit. How are people feeling about inclusiveness? And questions like that could be embedded in that kind of a needs assessment, right?
So I guess my question that I would have for the board is I had a handful of items up there that we've already gotten kind of quotes and estimates on for the capital needs, like for the boilers at Timpview and the fire line, the boiler at Timpanogos, the HVAC systems. Am I okay moving forward and with those and bringing the quotes in front of the board for approval at the next board meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then, and then.
Pending your review with the state, you're checking in.
That's correct, that's correct.
No.
So I've already reached out to the state and asked them, can we put these items on if we amend the plan? And they said, absolutely. So, that will, I'll have to amend and submit the plan, but I wanted to make sure that we have this conversation before we actually kick that off and send it up there. So we'll go ahead and get that moving along, and then Keith and I and Jason will discuss plans on the remaining funds based off of some of the direction we've heard here. So thank you. Is there any other questions around this? Okay, thank you.
Are we early?
We are early.
Wow.
All right, well, let's take a break for 15 minutes. Well, what time is
Unless you
Lindsay?
want to go early.
Well,
Except for, well, I've just notified some people
Well,
about
there's-
certain discussions that are happening at certain times.
Yeah, there's
and
people who follow our
wanna watch
agendas that I
certain
think
things.
we need to stay on that schedule for them.
Great.
How long?
15 minutes? 2:15, back at 2:15?
yeah,
Okay.
be back at 2:15.
All right, we're back from our break. Next, we're going to have a discussion with Lindsay Backus, our PEA president, about board and PEA relations. So I'm going to turn some time over to Lindsay.
Thank you for having me come and spend a few minutes discussing this. I had an opportunity to meet with Jennifer and Rebecca and Melanie this week, and we were discussing how PEA can better support communication, flowing both directions. So from PEA and teach educators in general to the school board, and the school board to all educators. And so that it's done in a way that doesn't inundate teachers with a whole bunch of emails, which is something that I've really tried to do as PEA president, so that each school has their point person and it's their building rep. It's not me. Although everybody has my email and can email me anytime about anything. But building reps are owning their school, and that is the point person that does the bulk of the communication. So here are some of if you want to just click the first one, Bonnie. So one of the things we discussed was helping educators know about school board meetings, when they're happening, and then also the agenda. So if they can tune in. Every month I try and have a member of my general board attend so that there is PEA presence. I give them the option of attending the study session, which when we were all chatting, that's my favorite time to attend, because then I get to hear the thinking behind everything that is being discussed and brought to you all. But they can also come to the business meeting where the decisions are actually voted upon and made. And then at my general board meeting, we do a school board report. Is there anything of note that we need to take to our teachers when I hold my building rep meeting? And whoever was at the school board meeting shares out about that. So that's at least how I'm taking what's happening with you all back to educators. One of the other things that I'm working on, we have PEA social media accounts. I am still trying to find a social media board member, and I'm hoping to get that taken care of in the next couple weeks so we can really amp up our social media presence, and that would be the other place that we can share when school board meetings are happening. Number 2, encourage educators to contact their school board members so they can share their perspective and their opinion. And I know that you very much want and seek their opinion. I also know that you have been encouraged to wait for educators to reach out to you. And so me being more overt about how to go about doing that with them, I can definitely do a better job of encouraging that so that you have a better handle on and pulse from educators' perspective in school buildings. Number 3, share my email with you, because if you would like to contact me, you're welcome to email my provo.edu. You totally can do that. But my PEA president email, that also will shift from president to president, which is why I've really tried to encourage and train educators to email that account, because it will follow the presidents that come after me, and they can see that communication exchange. Number 4, educators seek problem solving. If they are seeking problem solving from you, that you refer them to my email, and you're welcome to say, hey, have you thought about emailing the PEA president? And or encouraging them to resolve issues with their direct supervisor. And as we discussed, a lot of people are sharing problems, and it's tricky in your position because you can bring it to the people's attention, which would be me, but encouraging them to advocate for themselves and the people that they can go to for that advocacy to best occur is, from my perspective, the best place for them to come to. Last, the school board leadership, if if you're seeking teacher perspective, feedback, voice, coming through the PEA president to invite teachers district-wide, and or at select locations. So one of the things that we discussed was you want to get a pulse on a particular topic. The survey could go throughout district-wide, or if you just want PEA members, you can come through my PEA email and I can share it with my building reps who can then invite teachers. So if there's that kind of an exchange that needs to happen, that it comes through that email and coming through PEA. That was also something that we suggested too, as another means. So, questions? And also ideas and feedback, because this is just 5 things when I know there could be so many more.
I don't have a question. I just have just kind of a quick comment on this. This has been a little bit of a conundrum for me, trying to make sure I'm doing this appropriately. I want to get feedback from teachers, but I want to do it appropriately, and I've been taught that it's not always appropriate for me to just go out emailing teachers and things.
Yes.
And so then how do I get that communication? So
yes.
it feels like this really helps solve a problem for me, and I've actually done that before and gotten in trouble for it. Anyways, and so then I've shied away from it, and so this helps solve a problem for me, whereas I need a pulse from the teachers. I can come to you and I can say, Lindsay, I need to know from Westridge or from Dixon or maybe even district-wide how the teachers feel about XYZ. Can you send this out? And I think that is actually a really great solution, because when it doesn't come directly from a board member, there's a lot of that intimidation goes away, or sometimes people feel obligated to do certain things when a board member emails or whatnot, and I don't want people to feel intimidated or feel obligated or whatnot. But if it's coming from you, it feels a little, I don't know, it just feels a little bit more appropriate. And so I like that, and I feel like this is helping solve a problem, like something that I haven't known where to go with. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
Well, and what I like about it too is that it does solve that problem of, how should we go about it? But I can see that you could probably then email the entire board, hey, this was asked.
Yes, I can absolutely do that. And the what you're seeking, I can then share it with you. So the whole school board has that pulse on the voice and the perspective that is being sought.
So
Yeah.
just off the top of my head, I'm just thinking about this as well. This could be something that we could add to our board handbook, something about how to directly talk to teachers in our board
Yes.
handbook, and maybe have an update to our board handbook later on with something similar to this.
I think that's important. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think this is great, especially for official inquiries and things like that. This makes me feel like if I talk to a teacher, I'm gonna get in trouble. No. I'll do it anyway, but it just makes me feel like I'm gonna get in trouble. I mean, I'm not sending out surveys to teachers, but I feel like sometimes I like to be, I don't wanna overstep my bounds. I don't want to take Lindsay's place or Keith's place or Todd or Alex, whomever. But I also like to see what's happening on a school level. And sometimes I talk to teachers. Sometimes I'll ask for specific opinions because that's what they're dealing with, or they'll approach me for the big issues that I think are, I sometimes I'll talk to them, but a lot of times I'll refer them either to their building person or to Lindsay. I just want to make sure that, well, I'm not going to make sure because I'll do it anyway. But I want to be able to talk to the teachers without having to report my conversation to Keith or to you.
I agree, and that's been where I've had it felt very gray, and I wasn't sure where are those lines, So I feel like this is maybe more for when I'm in the school, and if I'm passing in the hallway a teacher and I say hi and hey, what do you think about, I don't feel like that's a big deal. And maybe, I don't know, Lindsay, I don't know if you can back me up on that or not, but it's more I feel like it's more the bigger things, hey, we're talking dress code. Can I get a pulse from the teachers about how you're feeling about this? I don't think it is appropriate for me to send out a survey to all of the teachers, or even to 26 of the 35 teachers in the building or whatever, right? I think that's where it's more appropriate to go through PEA. Am I right on that? I mean,
Yeah.
am I on the right, like,
Yes.
track with that?
And one of the, yes, and I think you seeking out teachers is where we run into teachers being like, wait, do I have to respond? Will I be in trouble if I don't? Because I've had that feedback from them, and I've let them know you are under no obligation to say anything, because unless you want to. And so if it's coming through a channel of me and they would like your voice, and I'm inviting you to share if you would so like to, then it's on the teacher's terms, as opposed to feeling like this anxiousness that I must respond. It's just more relaxed, I should say, and less tense is a good word that I could put with that.
I also just want to say I appreciate the first two bullets of your support in educating the teachers, that we do want to hear from them, and to empowering them on learning what we're talking about. If they so want to be involved, they know how. I did have someone in my area who's a teacher at a school not in my area, but she lives in my area. She approached me this week and was like, I'm just learning about this school board thing, and how do I communicate with you, and I'm just learning when our school board meetings, and it was enlightening to her, and I thought, oh, there's probably other teachers who might want to know these things, so thank you for being willing to share that with them.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
What do the teacher, I mean, there's generally a misunderstanding about how school boards work.
Yes.
Do you have any, and certainly we have teachers who worked in other districts, who did student teachings in other districts, and each district has a different culture around the school board. Some districts, if a teacher, like, talk to a school board member in the hall, school board members are sometimes really curated. They go as a group, or they go with staff into a building. If a teacher talks to them, usually that teacher will get talked to.
Yeah.
And say, how come you didn't vet your question with us first? Or, I mean, so there's a different culture. So how do we establish this culture that it's when somebody's dropping off their kid, you're at the football game, you get to talk to, we're a smaller district, we don't want teachers to feel like they're in trouble, but at the same time, them to understand that we can't fix anything.
Right.
And we're not their directly. We can't, or we're not their boss, and we're one of 7. It's sort of a strange thing. How do we establish our own culture? Because I think it's different than just letting what people know what school boards are. It's establishing our culture with other district employees in this district that I think will likely be different than our neighbors or other places.
That is a really excellent question, and I myself did not fully understand the functioning of the school board until I started grad school, and actually with my job started presenting to the school board 5 years ago, and realizing what it is that you do and don't do. And I think that and the scope of the roles and responsibilities that you all have. And I think together, helping educators understand that so it can empower them to have a collaborative relationship with you all, just as PEA is seeking to do that in behalf of all educators, but knowing they're a part of that process as well, and giving them the tools to do that. And I think the culture of having communication, I think that is really valuable, while also helping them understand it's not a have to. They won't be in trouble. And in fact, encouraging them to reach out to you as opposed to no contact. Like I shouldn't ever contact my school board member. I shouldn't ever do these things. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now, because teachers feel they're down here and the school board is kind of up here. And how can we decrease that distance in as we go about, not necessarily addressing the individual problems that they may be coming to you about, but the broader issues and concerns that are affecting us district-wide, and helping them be a part of that.
So I have a comment on that. So I just happened to be in the building when another meeting fell through, which is why I got invited into Jennifer and Lindsay's meeting that happened the other day where this was discussed. And I'm just going to talk about a thing that we discussed, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
We talked about the possibility of putting together like a infographic kind of flow chart type thing that helps people understand when it's appropriate to come to the school board and for what, and when it's not, and when it's appropriate to go through the correct channel of going to your principal first and having things escalate that way rather than going straight to the school board, et cetera. Because there is a difference. If you want to express an opinion on the upcoming discussion about dress code, absolutely send us an email. But if you need to have a problem solved about a tricky student-parent relationship, that's not us, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's your principal. And so we talked about putting together some kind of flow chart type thing that can help people understand we're open to communication and we want to hear from you on these types of things. On these types of things, follow this procedure. So McKay, where your question was, how do we communicate that? Maybe we need some little
campaign. I have a couple of things that I think maybe our culture, maybe things are a little better. For example, I get fewer anonymous letters than I did 9 years ago.
Oh.
I used to get lots of anonymous letters.
Yeah.
They felt like it was really important that they be anonymous, or they were going to get in trouble, or and that doesn't happen. But so I think that that people get to say, but just their understanding that, oh, I don't even get to tell your principal directly what to do.
Right.
That it's like if a teacher comes, it's sort of like a weather report. This is what's going on. Not that you can do anything about it. I thought you should know.
Yeah.
This is what's happening, and that's helpful to all of us, and welcome. And I think would make it uncomfortable. So I do, from my anonymous letter index, I think that we're doing better.
Good.
But I think that we can, I think that establishing that culture is, and I think the only barrier is sort of a misunderstanding. And I don't think that we misunderstand what the teachers are doing. I don't think we know directly, as much as they do. They're the experts, but how much they're appreciated, how much we want to, pay them. If we were in charge of all, so many things, but we're sort of in a system, and certainly we want to cheer that on, and so, even if that was just an agenda item for your board to say, hey, how do we improve this culture? And then bring it back, and we'll go, hey, that's great too.
I can take it to my board on Monday, because that's when our next general board meeting is. Yep, I could do that. Okay, anything else? No?
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we're going to have new policies discussion. Now, these are policies that we are not approving today. We're just going to be discussing whether or not we want to go further with any of these, just so that we're aware. Keith, do you want to start with the procedure forms first?
Yeah, why don't I do kind of an overview of this?
Okay.
So in line with what is happening nationally in national standards, Doug Finch has brought forward, this is the procedure 3228, both the procedure and the form about student name changes. This has been reviewed and the changes recommended from the attorney. We have reviewed this as council. We're ready to move ahead with it. We recognize that there are people in our community who may feel one way or another regarding this. This is straight down the middle in terms of being in compliance with legal standards that exist today. And so our intention was to be in line with those things. I think the most significant one, especially as I've heard some of these conversations going on in the news about nationwide issues, is that the parent is involved. So as you look that over, parent signature for requests on these things is essential. There are a couple of exceptions to that when the kid is emancipated, those kinds of things, but that's where we are. We're ready, as council, we're ready to move ahead with it. We feel that these are aligned with the legal stance that we're dealing with in our world, in our nation today. Therefore, this is the right thing to do for this district. If there are no questions on that, then I can move on to the others. But I want to give you a chance to ask me questions on that if you have them.
I actually have some, if that's
Okay?
okay. So I've had a constituent ask me about this particular thing quite a bit, and I've let her know that there's a possible policy coming up and whatnot. She keeps asking me, and this is a question I haven't been able to answer yet, about FERPA and how it relates to this. So with FERPA laws in place, if a child was to come and request that they are called by a different name, or student, is that something we are required to tell parents or not required to tell parents?
In this district, that would, for any change to the records, we would have to coordinate with parents on that. Doug, am I wrong on that? That's what the attorney said?
Again, the request is not necessarily a FERPA request because it's not changing the permanent record. It's just probably, again, just that situation in the classroom where they're asking for maybe a nickname or preferred name, so forth. But again, in our stance is to say that we are going to ask for parent consent to work with a different name.
So anytime a child asks for a different name, we are going to tell the child, we have to have your parents' consent,
Well, we talked about
right?
this in council meeting, and there are limits to this. So if somebody's legal name is James and he wants to be known as Jim in the classroom, the likelihood is we're not going to go and check that with the parent. If the person's legal name is James and he wants to be known as a very different name, Bucky or something like that, we may want to do that. Simply because if we're not careful on this, we may be putting the teacher in a very awkward situation. And the purpose here is to try to be clear about what our processes are.
So on that, are we, when we have to contact the parents, are we seeking permission, or are we are just notifying the parents what their child has?
It's the parent must sign off on this in terms of any change to a permanent record. Again.
No, I mean, no, I'm talking about just what Rebecca was saying, just in the classroom, right?
Just in the classroom.
So is it just say, hey, this is happening with your child, or is it, hey, your child's requesting this, will you please change it on the form?
Is
that
Or is it, no, I mean, just like, are we just informing them, saying, this is what your child is asking for, not even telling them you need to ask for a permanent change? So are we just informing them, or are we saying, your child is asking for this, do you give permission?
When we're talking about an informal interaction, such as just in class settings, I would say, I don't know that we address that directly, but I would suggest that would probably just be more informing the parent.
Yeah, this is a situation that probably HR has as far as direction for teachers in terms of their conduct. I know that the PEA has been working with their membership trying to get some clarification around this. So again, as it relates to FERPA, and that's what student services is regarding, if we're going to make any sort of change there and with the records was named on any documents, any that's recorded there, it's to require the parent's approval. The idea of saying, in class, can you just call me a nickname? I think that's, again, where there's a little bit of discretion that's being used currently to identify, is it a natural derivative of that name, or is there a significant change in direction this is seeming to go, that this would be great for me to consult with the parents regarding, that could be in line with what the policy that's in front of you, and that name wouldn't be used without parents' consent. I think that's the direction we're giving them.
Okay.
So
it's a maybe. It really does depend on the circumstance.
That's fine.
So the only thing I would ask to maybe put in here, and I only say that because of today's climate, you never know what could happen, making sure that the new name is not obscene in any way, or you never know what they might want to be called.
We wouldn't approve it.
Okay, just making sure this would have to be
It's
approved.
not automatic. It has to be approved by my department. We wouldn't approve some
Okay.
sort of a name such as that. Yeah, thank you.
And sorry, can I push just a little further on this too? I think some of the concern from some of these parents is coming because I don't want to say sometimes, I don't even know if this situation has actually happened in our district or not, but I think parents are concerned that teachers are going to be given information by the students about something pretty drastic, and then that teacher may not actually ever report. So are we requiring teachers to report these to the parents if it is drastic?
There's no mandatory reporting as it relates to this. This isn't abuse or neglect, so there's no mandatory reporting that's in place for this sort of a thing. So again, the idea of, for them to comply, then it's gonna require that parent conversation. But to report that they brought it up, there's not a mandatory reporting necessity there. But for
Okay.
them to actually make the adjustment, it's a significant change. In order to comply, the direction we're trying to give our teachers is that a parent, not just notification, but consent to do that is a conversation that ought to be had.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jason.
I just have to clarify. So is your question about other items beyond this naming piece that we're talking about today?
Well, that's where it gets so gray and murky, right? So I think that the fear of some parents is that the student is going to come to the teacher and say, I identify as a different gender and I want to be called a female name or a male name instead, that kind of situation. And so that teacher has been told something in confidence. And so now, if the teacher wants to use the new name that the child's requesting, they are going to have to tell the parent because they're going to have parent permission. But is there a little bit of gray where the teacher may not say anything? They don't necessarily call the child that, but they are still, they have they have the information, but they haven't told anyone, right?
I think for the most part, they would work with the student to be able to help them understand that if we want to make that change, we will need to involve your parents. So
Okay.
I think that's a big part of this, is helping the teachers just know how to respond.
Okay.
And I guess the reason I asked the clarifying question is because there are mandatory reporting guidelines for all teachers, right, for all employees of the school district. But again, that comes down to when there's safety involved. If a student comes and indicates what you just said, I would like to be called this other name because I identify this other way, the teacher doesn't have an obligation to report to the parent because there's not a safety situation involved. But to change the name, like we're saying, change what we call, the teacher would want to inform the student, we need to get your parents involved if we're going to move in that direction.
Okay.
So this is just for the rest of the school year, like if they fill it out. I mean, this doesn't really apply to, let me give you a situation. When I was a substitute teacher, I would be in a class and then I would never see these kids again. I don't memorize their names, so I would probably call Melanie today would be polka dot because she's wearing a polka dot shirt. I mean, that doesn't really apply to substitutes, right? Because they don't actually know the kids' names.
And I think what you're describing is you've made a choice to call students something to try to help identify them. I think there's a little bit of a differentiator there. If the student approached you and asked you to call them something different than what's on the roll of the school, again, we work closely with PSS, our sub-company, have them follow our policies and procedures, and that's why we have this coming before you today.
Okay. And it doesn't really, so another situation, when I was teaching at Tooele, I had a class with 4 Jordans. You know, fortunately, 2 of them had nicknames, so I called them by their nicknames. The one really wanted to be called Jordan, and so the 4th kid, I'm like, okay, we got to come up with a nickname. Who wants to pick it? Do you have a particular nickname you want to be called by? I'm like, if you say Jordan, which, you know, 2 of them are going to say, yeah. I mean, there's those weird situations where you have a class with 4 kids with the same name.
Well, I think in some ways, sorry, I believe that Doug in some ways addressed that. If there is a common derivative of the name that we're using in the class because the student said, hey, my name is James, I really want to go by Jim, or Jordy because it's Jordan. I don't think we want to get into the particulars of having to do that on every name. I think that's fine. The teacher could roll with that and teach it. I think it's when it becomes a point at which, let's go back to our conversation a little bit ago when we talked about dress code. Things that start to become a distraction and a
Is that helpful?
Can I call on Lindsay? She wanted to say something.
Yeah, one of the things that I have, my loud PE teacher voice. One of the things, it's good. One of the things that I have really been trying to help with the messaging of this is really, and we're going to circle back to this month, is helping teachers understand we're not trying to be exclusive. We're not trying to make kids feel like they're not welcome. We're just trying to respect that parents have rights to know, to make decisions about what is happening in relation to their student. And because of that, that also means we have to empower students. If that's something they want, who can they go talk to? The best place to go would be the school counselor who can help mediate that conversation if it is a really hard one. Because I also want teachers to keep their jobs. And there is a parent organization right now that is going after teachers, and I don't want that to be anything that any educator has to worry about, and helping them operate in the safety of parents owning these decisions while also helping kids feel welcome in their classroom. And I really feel like both can be accomplished and how they navigate that. And so far, specifically with my board and the experiences that they've been having, kids have been like, oh, I can understand why I would need to do that. And I don't know if they've taken action with taking care of filling out the form, but kids on the secondary level, it makes sense to them that that's something they would need to do.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So as PEA president, do you feel okay about this policy coming through and being approved if we were to approve it and go forward with it?
Yes.
So this is a procedure, and honestly, we wouldn't bring it to you for formal approval. We want you to know that it's there, and because of that this is a current event, we thought you should know about it. We're hoping that common sense makes this a lot simpler, although we're all anticipating that there could be challenges to that.
I have a clarifying question. So I'm looking at the form, and under important considerations, it talks about how all the legal documents that we might send on to like universities and things like that, we're going to give their first given name and gender assigned at birth. And then the last bullet point states that a legal name or gender identity change through the state courts would mitigate issues between their preferred and legal name and gender identity. So I'm just wondering, is the phrase gender assigned at birth and the other two bullet points the best accurate, or should it be legal gender?
Doug, what would you do in that circumstance?
Well, I will review it again. It's been reviewed by our attorney.
Okay, I mean, I'm no lawyer, but it seems contradictory.
I think, again, parallel language is what you're after there. So, again, I would want to, and we've gotten the input from individuals that this probably impacts the most, from some of our gender diverse LGBTQ parent groups and so forth. So I'll look at that again with them so that it represents what it is that you're after. So thanks for the feedback on that, though, because it is. You want to get the wording right. You don't inadvertently want to confuse or offend anybody.
Yeah, just make sure it's clear what will happen.
So, sorry to clarify too, the policy's there. Policy's there already, right? Okay, so what we're just looking at is the procedure here.
We're looking at an adjustment to the current procedure.
Got it.
Okay, you ready for me to introduce the others?
Yeah, do you want to do the...
Okay, so 1610 we talked about a few months ago, and it was tabled for a period of time with the comments from Board Member McCabe, and those comments almost are verbatim in the transcript that we have there in some of the side notes, just as context, because it's been a little while since we looked at this. Interesting that 2 Tuesdays ago, when we were all at the USBA event in the evening down in Nebo, that they introduced a USBA document that has some similarities in terms of well, they call it governance standards. We're just talking about board member conduct. And so there could be almost a deferential approach to the USBA one once it becomes a formal document. And I will be quiet after this, but the other one is an issue that districts are dealing with nationwide, and that is the existence of some political symbols in classrooms. I had Attorney Joan Andrews look at this thing nationwide and also base this language on current state law. And essentially, it says that there are some things that are legally supported to be in the classroom, and anything outside of that is more of a local board decision. So both of these have some potential controversy to them. So the big question is, what does the board want to do with these, if anything, as you look them over and think them over?
Which one are we starting with?
Start with one or the other.
Let's start with political symbols.
Go, Gina.
I guess my only concern is something, like it says flags of the United States and Utah only. What about a geography teacher that wants to put flags of other countries because that's part of?
It's in there.
So that's covered in here, that when it's part of the curriculum, that certainly is allowable. I had a math teacher one time who had a bunch of political stuff up on his walls, and he eventually, of his own volition, took them down. But he did so after a conversation we had about the fact that there were parents that didn't want to put their kids in his class because of that. And again, it had no direct relation to the subject he was teaching. But if you're teaching a French class, French language class, I would expect you to see a French flag on the wall. There are some things where, some situations where it just enhances the environment to do that. The question is, does that apply in all settings? And then, of course, we have many other flags that are out there, whether they're political flags or other representations that could also potentially be displayed.
This has been such a great meeting. So who gets to decide if something's divisive? And how do we know if something is political for that person, or is it a personal thing for them? I would argue that our own United States flag, which I love, has become a divisive political thing. One side has taken it and kind of made it their banner. I'm not advocating to get the American flag, the U.S. flag out of schools. I think it needs to stay. I just think this is, well, and then is it okay if they have it on a pin instead of on a flag? Like, what are we talking about? Is it like just specifically a flag, or is it a little flag? Like, does this apply to little flags? Like, I don't know. And how do we decide if something's divisive? How do we decide if something is, and who gets to decide that? Who gets to decide those things?
I think who gets to decide is the board gets to decide. Sorry.
So then we get to say this flag is allowed, this flag is not. Is that what we're?
If we want to go that direction.
Okay. I'm not okay with that, just FYI. I don't want that responsibility, but.
So I'm going to throw this out to council. What problems have we seen from other types of flags?
Or other symbols
Or
in
other
the classroom.
symbols in the
'Cause
classroom.
that's what it says, symbols in the classroom.
I'll speak first from the student perspective. It goes back to, again, the disruptive attire, dress code kind of things. Again, if you've got things that would be something that calls out a hatred or something that's bigoted or racist sort of attire, there can be things that's not a flag of a country kind of a situation. Just an example, but there's those political symbols that would be part of a student's attire that we addressed earlier that would have to be unsafe or unhealthy for a school setting. That's where I see possibly in the student conduct side of things.
Yeah, so for the employee side of things, this is really tricky. I think Gina asked some really good questions, because you have people who want to look at themselves as being able to display something, to be an advocate to people, to make kids understand that they're a safe place, while that same symbol then offends other students who come into the class. So this is a very divisive thing right now, and in many ways, I would say we've addressed it kind of case by case. And I feel like we've been able to work with people, and as we've had each incident, people have been understanding to see why it might be something that bothers someone else. And we've tried not to be forceful, very directive. There's a lot of laws that play into this. There's free speech, but as an employee, your speech is controlled when you come into the district and work in your assignment. You no longer have all the rights of free speech that you do as a citizen. And so, again, that's why this becomes so tricky. This is one, Lindsay and I have talked about this quite frequently, and this is one of those cases where I'm not so sure you find any safe haven in creating a policy over this, because you draw a line in the sand and people on both sides of the line are going to be angry about it.
And let me add that you know as well as I do that this is popping up more and more and more across the country. This has been developed for your consideration. We're not necessarily recommending its adoption right now. It's just that knowing that this is a current event, you can table it for a future time. You can say discard it and never bring it back. That's fine. There's no passionate ownership about this from my standpoint or on behalf of council that I can tell. It's more just a matter of should the board want to address this issue. According to our attorney, this is about the best way to do it, if there is a best way. And this was Attorney Joan Andrews who helped us with this one.
I just want to add that I don't fault anyone for this. We are in a charged atmosphere, and so I hope that my comments weren't taken as an attack on anybody. It's just so sticky. It's so sticky. So.
Well, your point is a good one. There are many social studies classes in this country, for example, that will display a Confederate flag. And they will do it within the context of the social studies curriculum. Now, is that appropriate or inappropriate? It really is a matter of the local community and how they perceive it, and also in how the teacher decides to introduce that concept. So you're right, this is a very charged issue.
My only concern is that I understand national politics, great. I would be fine getting them out of the classroom, that's fine. It's not a discussion if it's so divisive, maybe it's not a discussion I want to have in my stats class, great. I do want my teacher to be able to put up something that says this is a safe space. This is a safe space for every student. And I don't want something to come back and say, this is against district policy, I need to go after the teacher. Because I want that message to be able to communicate. I think any teacher that is having a problem with this, they're trying to communicate. I don't think they're trying to communicate votes or one way, they're trying to communicate, this is a safe place for a student in my classroom, every student is welcome. How can we do that? That is not a divisive issue. It should not be a divisive issue. Every student should be welcome in every one of our classrooms. How do we get there and leave everything else for everybody else?
But when one symbol to one group means that it's a safe space, and to another, it says, this is how I stand on a certain issue,
Doesn't
then
that,
maybe
doesn't
we
that
shouldn't
same
have that
thing-
symbol in the classroom and instead have a sign that says, I care about you and I'm a safe place for
Right,
you,
but
whatever your
does-
concern is,
Does
right?
that sign then just become, well, that's the new one?
Yep.
It's the new one.
Yep.
This is a student, this is advocating for the new one. So when Gina says it's sticky, I don't even think she's saying it's advocating for one position as the other. It's just that everything we do, if we say, well, this is acceptable, that thing will become the next
That's the next target.
thing. It's the next thing.
There are some districts who have taken a rainbow flag and removed them, but replaced that with a small little rainbow sticker. It's the same thing, in my view.
Well, and
Sure.
that was part of my question, like,
Right.
do the stickers count, or is it just an actual flag, and does it have to be a specific size to the flag, or is it?
Well, this is called the political symbols.
The symbol.
Ah,
It
got
So-
it.
does say symbols on here. I mean, there's a lot of flag in here, but it does say symbols.
And I agree with McKay and what you guys are saying, that this needs to be a safe, people need to know what where the safe places are, and those have been helpful for students.
But, in line with our diversity statement, all means all. So people that have various views, every one of our students need to feel safe in our classrooms. So how do we, how do we do that?
Well,
That
and then-
is
And how do we
hard.
protect teachers?
And how do we protect teachers?
Like, I think teachers factor into this as well.
And their good intentions.
Could there be a political symbol that is approved by the school district that anyone can display if they would choose to?
That may
All
not be a
means
bad
all.
idea, because I'm thinking to myself, well, what if someone comes in with a swastika flag? I mean,
Yes?
Yeah, we
I don't
need
wanna
a,
see-
we
I
need a
don't wanna
policy.
see that flag.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, but they're out there. And
Right?
yes.
I wouldn't want a Confederate flag in my classroom.
Derek had his hand raised a minute.
Derek?
Sorry, what was that? I was pulling something up.
Oh.
You had raised your
Jennifer
hand.
said you had your
Did you
hand
have your
raised.
hand raised?
Well, yes, kind of. There was something I didn't get a chance to talk to Keith about. On Monday, we talked about, Keith and I
Oh, yeah.
previously
Yep.
talked about this. This symbol right here, okay,
Your phone went off.
it's the shift for equality. That, easily could be something for, like what was discussed, which is every student that enters this classroom is considered equal because that's exactly kind of what this discussion is, but it's a symbol that has that same meaning and is used in that same meaning. So, if you want to talk about approving a separate symbol or something like that, there are things that are out there that are just like that, so.
I do wonder, I don't disagree. I do wonder if it's gonna become the next thing that people want to get rid of. But I
Sure.
guess we won't know until we move forward with things, so I don't wanna be obstinate here,
No, and
we're dealing with so much murky stuff today.
I know, it's.
Well, maybe the
such a
solution
great-
is, how much of a problem have we had? Maybe the solution is we don't need to address it quite yet.
After this meeting, you will need to address it. And you'll wish that you would have.
And along those lines, I wonder if there's just some ways to explore this further. We could involve people like Brian, Gazi, and others, because again, when we relate this to the statement that we approved over diversity and equity, I think when we are emphasizing all means all, how do other people take what is written in this policy to this extent? And just gathering feedback and information, and to your point, continuing to work with people individually at this time, based on current laws and statutes that are in place, to see whether or not things are a disruption.
If I can just add, I think what's missing from the conversation that makes it so challenging is that symbols do shift. And what it really comes down to, I believe, is intent. If we have this child that walks into the class with a swastika or the bars and stars, is that equivalent to a student that walks in with me it's about intent. I don't know that those are equivalent, right? Like one is clearly a message perhaps of hate, or the other one's clearly a message about inclusivity. And so that's what makes it so hard, is you're trying to nail down what is the intent of the individual. And so maybe it's a case-by-case kind of situation.
I would like to suggest that we keep looking into this, seeing what else we can understand, and maybe include a board member in that process, kind of like a committee that's got eyes on it and asking those questions and seeing how we can refine.
Not me.
I was going to suggest
And
Gina.
we would like
so
to.
there you go.
I'm volunteering for all kinds of
Gina,
things
Gina.
inadvertently.
Sure.
I have a question.
So Keith brought this policy to me, and when I first saw it, I was like, wow, of all the policies that will keep me up at night, this is going to be this one. In terms of PEA has teachers that sit on both sides of this, and as I spoke with my board and we really wrestled with this, we came to the conclusion that PEA would be neutral and encourage teachers, just because it is, in and of itself, this policy is divisive. And I really feel like diving into more with different groups, with Brian Yazzie and his group, and I would love for PEA to be involved also, because there is a lot to this, and making a swift decision to pass this policy, I think there are going to be ramifications on all sides of this, and I think being aware of that and the different perspectives will be really crucial.
Well, along with what she just said, no, mind you, this is just something that's being brought to us. We can just table this and we don't ever have to bring this up again, too.
I'm okay with continued conversations about this and everything that everybody's talked about. I'm not saying we need to shove this into the darkest corner of the universe, but I'm not ready to approve it, but I'm not opposed either to exploring this option further. Like, if we can come up with a symbol that everybody agrees with is okay, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It is fraught.
Maybe we need to talk about it in a meeting that allows for public comment, because we haven't had public comment yet.
Yeah,
And bring the police.
Yeah, I mean, that's why this is just our first viewing of this. We're probably going to have multiple viewings of this if we want to continue with this. So this is definitely not ready to be voted on today. So, any further comments on this one?
Just the whole reason we brought it forward to you was to get you thinking about it and to get the discussion started. I was not recommending approval on this. I was recommending a review and a discussion.
Well, I think that's responsive, because I think there are members of the community who have wanted something like this. I think being responsive is fine. It's okay to have these discussions.
And I'll tell you that I have received email requests from a number of other districts in the state who are asking the question, has anybody approved a policy along this line, because I'm looking for a model policy. I have not shared this one because I don't think it's anywhere close to being ready for to share with other districts, let alone to approve from our board.
Okay, any further discussion on that one? All right, we'll go on to policy 1610. So this is our second look at this. Again, we're not voting on this today. I think there's still multiple things that we need to clear up on it. So if anybody wants to discuss this one. In light of what USBA has with their professional governance standards, I just don't think it's necessary.
I think it's one thing for the association we belong to have standards. And another thing for us to have an agreement as a board, this is what all board members, whether it's the current board members or, you know, in 5 years, there's gonna be different board members on, right? Like, what are we all agreeing to? I think that's important, and I support that. I like how we've got that at the beginning part.
I agree with Jennifer. I think it's not a bad thing for us to have our own set of standards, too. I'm not opposed to having this policy. I know there was a lot of, like, objection to it the last time we brought it forward. And so I've been thinking about it a lot. And here's some of the things I've been thinking, in regards to this policy. First, the last thing I want to do ever is have to enforce a policy like this, right? This isn't here because anyone's looking to go out and do something punitive and punish someone. That's like about the last thing on earth I'm interested in doing or having to feel like I have to do. However, just like Nate stated when we discussed this the first time, I don't think it's a bad idea to have an external means of motivating people to do things appropriately and to do things with courtesy to fellow board members and to district employees. And that's one of the reasons why this policy came up in the first place, is because we got to a point where we felt like we were needing some extra motivation. So, like I said, I'm not interested in having to ever enforce anything like this. I'm hoping it never has to be used. I don't want to go out fining anyone. I don't want to go out having to take votes on things like this. Because if we're talking about murky issues, this is one of them. But this came about because
you didn't like the way that I was talking to a former employee, and I was calling him out on some illegal activities.
This came about because we felt like we had exhausted other means of requests and things, and we didn't know where else to go. Now, a lot of the stuff that comes into this policy is in statute. We didn't go making up this stuff. This is in statute. This was drafted by our attorney. It's not like we went out trying to witch hunt and come up with ideas. This was just a way of helping us figure out how can we help the situation. And frankly, we can't. I don't want to be part of a board that feels like we can get people to comply with what we want by treating them rudely or without any courtesy. That's not a good way to get people to comply with what we're looking for. There's other ways to go about that. And so I'm just looking for a way to help us feel motivated to do things appropriately. I mean, that's what it came down to. So I don't know, if anybody else has any good suggestions on how we can figure out as a board, all of us, every last one of us is included in this, to be able to help ourselves learn how to react to situations appropriately, so people aren't running from us in fear of how we're going to treat them, then I'm open to other suggestions. But I'll tell you that this is what it came down to in the moment, because I didn't know where else to go.
We have an election coming up. I would move that we retain this as a draft policy and the new school board in January, where a new school board can make the decision about this policy so it is clearly about the future and not about the past, would be really helpful. a new school board could decide this is how we want to do this. And I think that it's, I think that is, I think that there's, I don't think there's any,
The truth of the matter is, this is all in statute.
yeah,
We don't necessarily have to have it in our policies. It's all, we can act on any of these things anytime, right?
sure, and we should adopt, you know, USBA's policy as part of our official handbook, you know, too.
Mhm.
And, but, we, you know, all of us need to do better, and, you know, and all still means all. I have an example of my own that I could share that I probably don't want to do.
We're not here to call people out on individual, you don't have to, I mean,
Yeah, but, you know, where, but wanting to do better is not a bad thing. Wanting to create a standard is not a bad thing, but if the environment is gonna continue to be that this is about a specific incident in the past, let's just make a break from that and go.
And no, even if this were to pass today,
Yeah,
there's nothing we can do about past
sure.
nothing. This is for us to move forward.
So, and the,
I don't want this to be about the past, but I do want it to help shape our future,
yeah.
for sure. And I mean, that's the idea behind any rule or law that's out there. They're typically not made until you see a reason to make it, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's why we now have to go through 2 hours of security checks at TSA before we get on an airplane because of September 11th, right? And you
Right.
put in all these rules because of incidents or whatever.
It doesn't fix anything.
I'm not trying to focus on the past with this, but I am trying to help us prevent future problems, right? I mean,
And it's a good reminder for all of us on the board.
So if it's already in statute, the purpose of having this, if it's already there and it can already be enforced, what's the purpose of this?
the purpose is so that we have it here in our own personal or board handbook in our district, so it's reinforced and understood. I mean, this had to be sought out, this information. I don't know that any of us or many of us were even very aware of it. Helps to be aware of these kinds of things, I think. I mean, that's why they post speed limit signs, right? That's why I just think it's good to be aware and to know. And like I said, I'm not interested in going out and enforcing this. I don't want to. I don't want to be in that situation. That's not the goal, is to be able to go out and find someone. I don't want to do that. But I sometimes I feel like, I don't know, and maybe, I don't know, sometimes we need to state some obvious things so that people understand where the boundaries and the rules are and where those lines need to be drawn personally and in these professional, I mean, when you're personally speaking at these professional meetings.
So this is not a statement of pro or con, this is just, we have a number of policies that are a local restatement of state law. And just because they represent how we will do business.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I actually do like McKay's idea of waiting until the new board is put in place in January and bringing this forward, but I still think it would be good for those of you, especially who are still on the board, to look at things that you would change on here. And go forward from that. So it looks like we'll bring this back in January.
And I think January will be a good time, like to not wait till February or March, because we're gonna say, oh, look, A through H, this is what we as board members are committing to, or whoever's on the board.
Okay. Any further discussion on this one? All right. All right, next I'm going to turn the time over to Anne Marie Harrison about curriculum materials usage.
Thank you. I appreciate getting to talk with you about another really important issue. And as many of our discussions are, this one is based, let's see if I can turn this on. This is based on probably the hottest topic we ever talk about, money. I think that's one reason it's coming down to it. There are some really important issues behind it, but my sense is, from what the superintendent communicated, is this board is committed to trying to find money for teacher salaries and is asking, could it perhaps come through some of our curriculum? So I want to go back bring up two issues. How can we save money across the district? You're doing that everywhere. And could this be a place for it? I understand some of you have heard some information about schools, about the lack thereof, the lack of curriculum use. And I have some data to share on that. And I hope that we can have a conversation about this so I know what information you want me to collect in the future to better make decisions across the board. So let's start right here. This is my very first, do you recognize that, Keith? As soon as I got my job under Keith, this is my first meeting, my notes with him. You don't see all the teardrops that have dried on there, but you do see a few of my scratch notes.
I love that you still have them.
Oh, I keep them. So I brought in, and again, he had that section.
This is all my fault.
Not at all. This is all his inspiration. I hope that you recognize that. This was first on his list, that I hope every grade and course has a curriculum notebook that includes required materials, pacing guide, units, assessment standards, online resources and supplemental materials, intervention materials, and pedagogical support, including Hattie's research. We have those. After many years and a lot of work, we have those. We're making a shift in secondary that is making the curriculum notebook the format of Canvas. So teachers don't have to go look for something else. They pull all those things in on Canvas, and it can just be part of where they're living. So one of those things, curriculum can be described by many people many different ways. When we talk about curriculum materials, we're typically talking about a textbook and or teacher manuals and or student books and or workbooks. They vary in quality, they vary in scope, but that's the general idea. And I'll tell you that as a student, teacher, and principal in Provo District before this happened, there was a large lack of uniformity. And I think in some cases, that was great. Oh my gosh, I got so-and-so at 10th View. She was so great. I knew I'd get everything there. My sister got that one. Oh, too bad. They weren't going to have as good of an experience. And that was just kind of how things were. And not to say every teacher, we're not looking for Stepford teachers. But there was, it was called site-based management, and you probably know that about the time superintendent came, many people on the board, many administrators, many people in the system were saying, hey, this isn't fair, and it's not working out well. So I think that this was, and you can speak for yourself if I misspeak, but I think this was one of his attempts to bring that sort of, hey, let's figure out what we need to do together, define those kind of goalposts so people understand where are the areas that you can operate freely and where do we come together. So I'm going to show you the presentation very quickly that I showed our teachers as I was talking about the notion of curriculum notebooks in the beginning to try and build the vision for what this was. Because I can tell you across the board when we looked around, there was not a lot of uniformity or uniformity of understanding on what our curriculum approach was. So the first argument I want to make for it is this student, and everyone who's been in here as a teacher has had a student like this. This represented a student I knew who was in my class in Mazer in first grade for about it was a few weeks to a month. And then my friend at Franklin called me and said, oh, he's in here. And then he was gone forever. And then my friend at Tippin Oaks called and said, oh, he's here now. And he was back and forth between, I think, Costa Rica in the meantime. So the mobile student is a reason we need uniformity. When that student goes to 3 different schools and gets into 3 different assessment systems that don't talk to each other, 3 different curriculum programs that don't correspond, we don't know where he is in his learning. So this alone is a reason, and we have an increasing number of mobile students. This you may recognize, this is the mobile teacher. You may know and see teachers who have 3 preps now. We're looking at FTEs pretty carefully, and sometimes I know secondary teachers say, oh, I gotta find someone with a health endorsement. And they find that social studies teacher who's like, I do not want to teach health. I do not want to teach that. But we have people that have to cover many preps. And we have class changes at the last minute, and a 5th grade teacher has to become a 1st grade teacher. That kind of mobility is increasing as well as the term of our teachers is decreasing, their average term. So we need to provide more support. I think as you think about the teachers in the schools you know, we have fewer and fewer. Terry, you went to Mazer, right?
Yep.
So right there with you. You probably remember Mrs. Bergner and Mr. Harrison, Mr. Palmer, Mr. Oh, shoot, I was early 80s.
Mr. Parkin.
Parkin. Okay, I taught with Parkin.
And Mr. Rogers, my brother had
Mr. Rogers. Okay, so you're 2nd generation. Those are my. So there are teachers who taught very frequently for 30 years, or even for a period and then came back later. We just don't see that happening as much anymore either. Those 30-year careers are kind of gone from the main population. And that describes this, the new teacher. Look at this frightening information. I don't have an update, but I can guess where it is. So this is data from 1987 to 88 saying the mode, that kind of an average, the mode, the most frequently occurring was 15 years of teaching experience. That's when I graduated from Timpview, I was 88. Look here, 2007, 2008. That's when I was becoming a principal. The mode at teachers here in the US was 1 year. Jason, do you have any sense what our mean or mode are? Yeah. We're working, our department does mentoring for new teachers. I was at a school yesterday with a principal who said, I could take 10 coaches every day to just work with these new teachers. And she said, I just fear they're not going to stay. I fear they're not going to stay because they need so much help. The demand is so great for them. And they're really struggling with just classroom management, tier 1 classroom management. So again, when we say, hey, new teacher, do whatever curriculum you want. That's kind of what was given to me when I started. When I started teaching, it was, look at all those books. We've kept all these series. Have fun choosing what you want. This is me, the aunt, serving dinner at my sister's house. She had 2 daughters, and she always cooked whatever they wanted. And so when I went there, I tried to do that too. I tried to make steak and potatoes and chicken and rice for all of them. And guess what? None of it was super fantastic. And this happens to us with professional development and support. When we have all kinds of things going on at a district level, our support, our professional development classes, we can't help them as much because they're so varied. When we can get coaches trained, Lindsay's one of our instructional coaches. She's a middle school teacher that can go into a kindergarten classroom and teach 95% group because she and our staff has learned 95% group so well that that's doable. So really when we have common features, it assists a district in being a better support. Reason number 5, if you haven't seen Cake Rex, this is one of my favorite sites. It reads there. If you can't read it, I'll read it. Best wishes, Suzanne. Underneath that, we will miss you. I worked at bakeries. I went to cooking school. And I did cakes, and so this is meaningful. I want sprinkles. Let's celebrate in the middle. Happy birthday. The picture is on the flash drive. So this is going to the point of communication. When we are doing similar things, I think we get to communicate better and more clearly. When we're doing lots of different things, oh, tier 2 in this program means this. Tier 1 in this program means this. Oh, well, the leveled readers aren't used for tier 2 here, or they are used here. So having commonality, that language, particularly if we expect our average teacher to be here for 3.7 years, they don't have forever to learn every little thing we're doing, particularly if they switch a school and we're not similar. Number 6. This is the one that gets me the most. I lived for a time, family, and lived in Massachusetts for a time, and my nieces went to Winchester School District. They lived in Winchester, which is a lovely little town, not too far from Boston. My sister and her family lived on an old estate of the Ginn family, the old publisher of textbooks. And I was considering teaching out there, and I was looking at different districts, and of course I thought, oh, I want to go to my niece's schools in Winchester. And then I also went to Somerville, which wasn't too far, and to Arlington, which wasn't too far. And you guys know their funding districts are mostly by townships. So you got a wealthy town like Winchester, they're spending $27,000 per student. You go to a Somerville, not to say a Brockton, and they're spending $12,900 per student. I don't want us to get back to an inequitable situation, because I have to say that the audit we did when we looked at this, we saw there were huge disproportionate materials and support for teachers. I talked to teachers at Timpview that every year they got to go to the conference they wanted to. Every year they got to choose the class schedule they want. They had every book that they wanted. And the new teacher went in the summer and, snagged what they could. I think particularly with our curricular services, we cannot allow an equitable access to education to be by chance. So, as I said, when I got this directive from the superintendent, I wanted to assess where we were with curriculum. First of all, there was a lack of clarity and a huge disparity. So at one school, oh yeah, we have this. Yeah, we're supposed to be using this music program. Yeah, we do this art program. Other schools hadn't seen it in years. Some schools, oh yeah, we do this program. Some said, oh no, K-3, we decided we like these better. One school, oh, we do guided reading, that's our program. So that was pretty amazing. There was a pattern that elementary ELA and math tended to be purchased by the district as a group. There was pretty uniform usage, although people in our office, the F word means something different. It's fidelity, and people got very scared of the term fidelity, meaning doing the program as designed. But I'll tell you, I was in the office working with Ray Morgan when the only way we could make that happen was by going to the business administrator and saying, hey, these books are getting old, we need to, and so they'd save up for a couple of years so we could do one adoption and keep them as long as we could. The second area was a clear hodgepodge. There was a lot of site-based and or teacher-based materials. They came from everywhere. Some the school purchased, some a department purchased, some teachers purchased, and lots of it teachers developed. I'll tell you that I was at Timpview in '86. I was about a sophomore, junior. And when I went to Timpview looking to inventory their materials, I found books that I would have used there as an adult 7 years ago. I found maps at Provo High, the old Provo High from the 60s in a social studies class. So this is talking about our systems that we have in place to make sure we're reviewing things. It wasn't in place, and again, the superintendent, I give him great credit for bringing this emphasis into our system. Can you give me one more slide? This is not wanting to work. There we go. So here are the actions that took place. The actions that took place, we developed a curriculum review cycle. That is right, that is right here. So we said, you know what, we want to look at curriculum as it's needed and have a review, so we're continually looking at the whole process. So you'll note that there are 3 years or phases for each of these. The first column there, the first wide column, is the curriculum needs assessment. That's where we assess what's been going on, have the standards changed, what materials do we use, and what do we need to do. The next year is curriculum review and recommendation. That can be pretty broad and wide. They've come up with different answers. In some cases, they've said, yep, we reviewed all these materials that we've gotten samples of, and we recommend we buy this one. The science committee said, no, we can make something better on our own, so they determined to make something on their own in common. But that's that phase, and then the final year here is the professional development phase, where we focus on those areas. And I have 3 directors that lead each of those. They're related to their work. So you can see we have the topics that there are core standards on here. I'll note with you that the curriculum review policy brought us policy 4020. And, I'm going to get to that. Here are just a couple of notes from your verbiage in that policy. The Board of Education of Provo City School District has the responsibility to prescribe a district-wide curriculum. The curriculum will be evaluated, adapted, and developed on a continuing basis, hence the cycle. The board is legally responsible for the selection of all instructional materials used in the district. Just saying that was reiterated in this legislative session, and in October we'll bring a revised policy 4020 that gives us some of those same requirements again. And then a statement that the new materials represent the baseline of instructional essentials for all students to know. We should see it being used as the main curriculum in a given course. Additionally with that, we created those teacher committees. I showed you each of those columns is a committee in an ongoing cycle. And when they reach that curriculum cycle, our policy describes it turns into an instructional materials group. We invite community members to be a part of that. And then about 6 years ago, the state created a state standards revision cycle, which was very helpful. We kind of realigned ours. So now we are going through as the state's looking at the standards and assessing them, we are too, so that we're ready if they put out new standards and we need different support materials, we're ready with that in that second phase of the process. We developed an ongoing budget, the superintendent did and Stephanie did. It's been about 700 to 1 million. I think maybe it was 1.1 one year to make something happen. And all of that allowed us to align professional development, academic initiatives, and assessment more. When you're doing similar things, we can talk about teacher clarity in this context and in this context and this context. So, next section, I want to talk with you about the challenges we've seen. First of all, increasing costs. There's some data that's shown up here. Let me tell you that the bolded, that's what we ended up paying. So in 1920, the adoption was K-6 math. These were all the bids. The highest one was 1.4, the lowest one was 690, and the team selected the 810 one. Again, it's a little, you should know that all of those are not equal. That's just the bid that came in. Some materials people said, nope, right off the bat. They didn't really meet the needs we had. But just to give you an idea of the range. This is the science group, and again, we got some really high bids, And they ultimately said, no, we think we can do this better. We have these seed storylines if we made kits to go with them. So part of that is teacher labor. They crafted it on their own. We did put kits together where people felt like that was most useful in the elementary. Secondary kept telling us, nope, we have a lot of these. I get what I need. And then the bids last year, we adopted K-6 ELA curricula. That price is, this was our adopted curriculum. We're kind of we're disputing what we got a little bit, so I'm not sure how much it'll be. But those are the other two bids out there for us. So you can see that if we're getting $1 million a year, it's a bit challenging. And I'm going to show why it's even more challenging. Because we have maintenance costs. One of the things, if any of you ever becomes a legislator or something, governor, president, I need your help on something. So first of all, in the past we could say, you know what, we'll just make those books last a few more years. As a teacher, we had books that were 15 years old that we could still use for things. Anymore, the publishing system has really switched. They're smart. They say we sell licenses now, not materials. We sell you a license, then we throw in materials, generally speaking. So because we are digitizing so much of what we do, and the online platform, for many reasons, is so important, we have to have the license. This is the thing. Okay, Gina, I heard you got voted on for the mayor, governor, legislature. No. Okay, whoever you get to sign it up. The state has something in place, and Tina and I are frustrated with this each time. They will only let us sign 5-year contracts. The cycles are in 7 years. So we buy we want to buy 7-year contracts. We can only buy them for 5 years at a time. So that means we have these ongoing costs that are $194 to $690 per year because we have 2 more years on the cycles going off of their first year purchase that we're having to pay for. So costs are a huge issue. I don't expect that they're going to go down. Again, we have other programs. This is a typing one the superintendent asked us about. Then lost or damaged materials, that's typically what we spend. So even if we say we can get an adoption for the 5 years, to maintain it for 7 years to stay within the cycle is a different question. Finally, and I think this is one of our biggest challenges, and this is getting to the point of the whole conversation, is usage. We've had a culture going back to, you've heard of that site-based culture, and here's how we do it here. And that was present in Provo for a long, long time. And we still encounter it a lot. And again, I don't think anyone in this room is saying, you do it exactly this way every time, there's no variation. I don't think that's what it means, but I do think it means we have some critical resources, plans, policies, materials that we follow so that we can teach our kids better.
And Marie, I want to add to that. So I was a teacher. I started anew in Prince George, British Columbia. They handed me a curriculum guide of everything that I would be teaching. When I came down here to Utah at one point and I went to Woods Cross High School and I was teaching there, I was handed the state curriculum guide and a district curriculum guide. Here's what you will teach. Now, I wasn't told every day what I would do with it, but I was expected to generally follow that. When I came to Provo, I said, where is the similar guide? We don't have those anymore. And so I was left wondering, if I'm a brand new teacher, how do I solve this problem? What do I teach? And especially if in my role, as I look at some of the research that I've studied over the years, both by Hattie, Doug Reeves, and others, good districts have alignment. Alignment doesn't mean lockstep, it means there's consistency. So good districts have alignment in these areas. That's one of the reasons why I pushed Anne-Marie so hard to move in this direction.
Thank you. So fighting that culture was and is hard. I'll tell you, there's a very big difference between elementary and secondary. Elementary tends to implement it tends to be aligned far more than secondary. Secondary tends to see optional on everything that comes out. And this is a many years going thing. Todd, when did you start these alignment discussions with? Was it Sam at Provo High, or who was it at Provo High? Jeff Schoonover.
2011.
So 2011, and then in my job, I was picked up to do it after that. So 11 years trying to get, and it's gone from very, hey, you guys tell us what we do. Hey, what could we put together? And I've sat in so many meetings now where I hear one school say, we have the right way, we're not going to do it like them. And the other school says, we do it the right way, we're not going to do it like them. And at the end of every one of those meetings, I can say, there may be a couple of exceptions, but almost every one of those, a new teacher stands by at the end and says to me very quietly as she leaves, I know that others people don't like this stuff, but I love it. Oh my gosh, please don't take it away because it's saving me. Like, this is so good. I don't think they know what we have. And I think that there's some truth to that. I want to show you some examples. This was a concern, and in 2020, Devin asked if any of us had any items we wanted to go for an internal audit. They do one every year by an external evaluator, the state evaluator. And I said, yeah, I'm curious about curriculum use, particularly in ELA. So this was elementary ELA teachers, and the question was just, do you use these materials? And you can see that all or almost all, 41%, most. So we're at almost 75% are saying generally yes. This some, and then this is none or very little, and this is I didn't answer. Generally thinking, okay, we might interpret that well. The evaluator came back and he said, I couldn't get the high schools. They said they wouldn't do this unless they could do it in groups. So they reported it this way, he's recorded it this way. He created this graph showing that, again, their ELA materials, English Language Arts materials, which a committee of those teachers chose, that TIPView, 6 of the 10 who responded said none or very little. TIPView, 4 said some. And I know that anecdotally, you can read in the report more, it's like, I use this novel set from here, and I use the videos they have in this section. You can see the reports. There were no responses that said all or almost all. So by this alone, it begs the question, do we continue to spend money on things people aren't using? I think, I don't think it's a simple answer because it doesn't take away the responsibility of the district to provide curricular materials. In fact, the laws are just getting more strict, as you can tell by the library law, about what kids are exposed to. And curriculum, unlike library books, are forced materials. So I would ask, as we plan for the future, I'll give you a few ideas I have. I'd like your input on what more you would like.
And Marie, I should point out, we've got a business meeting starting in 9 minutes.
This is my last slide, and it'll take me to. Thank you. Thank you for the time. So I think we should formally review the district's commitment and stance. And maybe this is the time for the new board, as McKay suggested earlier. I think things we need to say are we committed to commonality and alignment? Are we committed to continuing to fund this on a district level? The law specifically talks about schools, but that would mean, are we giving this to schools to make their decision on their own? Content areas and grade levels, again, maybe we say we only do ELA and math. Or maybe we say we just do elementary, secondary is not doing it. And I think this, most of all, is do we have the will to require usage? Nobody likes to talk this way. Nobody wants to strong arm a teacher in making decisions. But I can tell you that what I hear, I always meet with the group in the beginning that's starting, and I will say straight up, like, we are looking to provide materials. And I've had some of the best secondary teachers that you know and love say to me, I feel like a bad teacher if I have to use programs. That's culture. I also have a great article showing how much time teachers can save by using these materials and how these materials have increased in quality because we have so many national standards now, because of how digital presentations make that work. We can supervise, through our supervisory capacities, we can make things happen, but do we have the will to do that? Again, I think we need to continue to talk about clinical supervision and evaluation emphasis. On that document I showed you from Keith, he showed how your department is supportive, not supervisory. And so it really needs to come from the supervisorial level down to principals, down to teachers, that this is the expectation. Teachers are telling us all the time, well, my principal lets me do this. Well, we don't do it in our department, or we think this is better. Better than what a group of educators and administrators and the public investigated and said this is what we want for our students. That's to me seems, that's a pretty bold statement if someone can make that. Oops. We need continued auditing and surveying across subject areas. Again, getting more data like we had. We do have some of that I can share later. And then this is the board's input. I wait from you what other information, surveying, internal audits again, discussion groups, what information would you like to help make this decision on how we proceed in this manner? I know that I'm cutting it close, so I'm going to turn the time over to Keith. He can talk more about this issue, or if you want to send me notes, or if at a further meeting, maybe Melanie through the board presidency, I can get some direction on specifics. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Actually, I don't really have anything to add. I just think this is important context for you to have as we look at proceeding with future adoptions. It begs the question, should we spend the money if it's not being used on a regular basis? And what are you, the board, prepared to support us with if we do need your help? If we decide we're going to continue to do this, I don't want to fight with anybody. I really don't. But I also don't want to throw away brand new materials after 7 years of non-use when we go and buy new materials. That to me is a complete waste of district dollars. And it represents something that I wish I could have solved while I was here. So there are good districts who do this and they know how to do it right, and we haven't got that done yet. So I'm just asking you to think about this presentation as we come forward in the future with future curriculum purchases.
Right.
That's really all I have.
Were there any other further questions for Anne Marie, or? Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. All right, in lieu of time, I'm going to move the review of council ideas from the June study session to our next board meeting, and we can have that then. So we'll move that to that point. And if so, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. Please meet back here, take 3 minutes if you need to go, and then meet back here at 4 p.m. and we'll start the business meeting. Okay. Let me get started here. So welcome. Today is Friday, September 30th, 2022. We are meeting as the Provo City School District Board of Education. We're meeting at the Grandview Technology Center at 1591 North Jordan Avenue in Provo, Utah. The time is currently 4 p.m. And we will begin with the roll call. Melanie Hall, Board President.
Rebecca Nielsen, Board Vice President.
Jennifer Partridge, Board Member.
Gina Hales, Board Member.
Terry McKay, Board Member.
McKay Jensen, Board Member.
Keith Hertel, Superintendent.
Derek Anderson, Business Administrator.
Okay, is there a motion to convene?
I move that we convene business meeting.
Okay, we are now in our business meeting. The first thing on the agenda is the superintendent search consultant selection. I'll just give a little brief thing about this. At our last board meeting, we were presented with 5 different consultants that could help us with the new superintendent search. And as a board, we discussed the 5 different options, and we have come to a decision. So we need to make a vote on that today. So
I just need a motion.
I just need a motion.
Okay, I'll make it.
Go ahead.
I move that we select the help of USBA and Richard Stoll in the selection of our new and upcoming superintendent.
So motion made by Board Member Nielsen. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Board Member Hales. Is there any further comment on this motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor indicate with aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. All right, next we need to approve the library books policy. Actually,
Where's
let's do the
new one?
audit report first.
Oh, okay.
So,
I don't think I got it. Oh, there it is.
and so Derek, do you want to just talk about that real quick?
Yep. What you've got before you is our audit report for the FY 21-22 fiscal year. It was overall a great audit this year with all the changes and swings that occurred, and our auditors gave great remarks on the team. And so what we're asking the board to do is approve the audit report as was presented kind of in the study session earlier today.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve and approve. I move that we approve the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 audit report.
Motion made by Board Member Hales. Is there a second?
I second that.
Second by Board Member Partridge. Is there any further comment on this motion?
I just wanted to have Derek speak to, I noticed in the report that we received some recognition or awards for that. Will you mention that, please?
Yep. So our team is very dedicated, both on the budget and accounting side. So our last year's audit report, we also got the GFOA award, along with the I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I might apologize. I don't have the report up in front of me. There was 2 reports that we got, and we get it for our audit report and for our budget. And the audit report got both of them again this last year, and our budget report got both of them the prior year. But we are going to only apply for one of them going forward, because by applying for 2 of them, it creates dual reporting standards. So you duplicate reporting almost the same thing twice at times, and so going forward we're probably just going to go for one, just to simplify the reporting, so that way the same information is not displayed twice.
How can we get awards for our technology department?
All right, is there any other further comment? All right, those in favor indicate with aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, next we need to approve the library books policy. Anne Marie, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, according to the legislative sessions HB 374, districts are required to have in place a library materials or a policy that helps districts remove material that is determined to be sensitive or by definition pornographic or indecent. I've emailed board members the updated versions of what I believe I heard from you this morning. Changes are in red, or additions are in red, strikeouts are removals, and highlights are clarification of something that I heard asked. You have a policy, a procedure, and at the bottom of the procedure for now are the 3 form links, so we can get this operational immediately. We may determine to do the form links different, but to be ready, we have them there now.
Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm going to need a minute just to look over this.
Yeah, sure. Can I make a comment on, I'm reading through, Anne-Marie, on
Tell me which you're reading. Draft.
number 4D where it's in the policy.
Okay.
I'm sorry, in the procedure. I apologize, in procedure.
Okay.
4D, the sentence doesn't make sense. I'm trying to figure out what it was you're trying to say. In
4D.
parentheses, invitations, principals will be made, solicit school PTA, PTO, and school community council leadership to identify. Is it missing some words there? Because it's not.
So it's in a list, so let me read it aloud and see if it sounds right to you. So the district administrator will chair each district materials review committee and invite the following members to the committee. A, B, C, D. 4 parents/guardians of district students with at least 1 coming from the school where the request was made.
And then in the parentheses is where it doesn't make sense to me. That's where I'm not
so
understanding.
Principals will solicit school, PTA, PTO, and school community council leadership to identify potential parent representatives.
Okay, it says.
That's not quite how
That's
our
not how
version
it's
reads.
read. It's reading here. Here it says invitations, principals will be made solicit school. Something's not right in our copy, at least.
Invitations will be made by principals?
Yeah, is it
Principals will make invitations?
something?
Probably
Just
not see it
the grammar is off, or something's funny.
Okay. So it does not read to you. Do you want me to put mine up on the screen?
Sure.
Or do you want me to send you this
If
again?
it reads,
Yeah.
if it, well, yeah, maybe that
Put it on the
works.
screen, it'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that okay? I've decided I'm never using Word again. I'm only using Google Docs, but I started this in Word. Okay, so this is the procedure, and here's
Oh, yeah.
the section.
Okay, yeah, that's not what we have, but that looks much better. Yeah. Principals
Okay.
will solicit school PTA, PTO, and school community council leadership to identify potential parent. Yeah, okay, that's great.
I'll say
Okay.
the end of that next sentence, I think the word should be community, not committee. Various groups
In the community, yeah.
I think it does mean committee, to ensure a committee represents various groups in
Within the
no, you're
community.
right.
Or from the community,
Yeah, I was reading it differently,
the
but I like,
diversity in our community, yeah.
you okay with that rewrite? I'm going to change this now. This is actually F3 because we eliminated a policy.
Okay, Anne-Marie, I've got a question on number 5 on that procedure.
Sure.
And maybe your version looks different than mine. Oh, maybe. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, you struck it out. So on ours, it didn't look struck out about the meetings being in public, so.
Once again, I apologize
Okay.
that I
No,
didn't
you're
get you the right one.
Also, I have another question. I didn't see anything in here about in the case of a tie. Did we want to add something about that?
That's
Or is it
right.
in yours?
My suggestion was going to be, in the case of a tie, the chair will try to negotiate consensus or make the final call. We could flip a quarter.
That's probably not a good idea.
Yeah. I just know you had said you wanted to add something about that, so.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking was just that. But
So
Jennifer, yeah.
theoretically, if we start this process right now, it's gonna be 2 months before we get to that point.
Mhm.
So we have time to think that through, of what we want that part of the, because that's procedure, right?
Yeah,
It
that's
can
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
procedure, yeah.
So, I mean, we have time to think that through.
That's true.
Do we wanna do something like that? Do we wanna say,
I think we're
like a
just,
mistrial, we gotta do a new committee, like?
Well, and ultimately, that's not ours, right? We are not procedure. We only
Yeah,
approve
that's right.
policies,
I think we're
so-
just helping them get the basic,
Yeah.
like, I like that we added what Terry suggested, you know,
Mhm.
going to meeting with the district,
Yes.
going there to the school administrator first, and then going to the next part.
I think it looks good to me. I read through it all.
That's the
Okay.
procedure. This is the policy.
I move that we approve the library books policy.
I'll second it if everyone else is ready to go ahead and vote.
All right, so we have a motion by Board Member Partridge and a second by Board Member Nielsen. Is there any further comment on this motion?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I have lost sleep about this one. So I think something that everyone on all sides of this issue can agree on is that we all want to protect our kids, and we all want our kids to be safe, right? We want the best interest of kids in mind. And I'm glad that we can start there. I have some unique work experience. I was a therapist for children and adolescents who had sexually offended. I've also worked with victims. I work extensively with victims of sexual abuse. And when I work with a kid, I work with their whole family. So I see the whole family unit. I often have people asking me, how can I keep my kid from being abused? How can I keep my kid from being a victim? And the real answer to that is you can't. You can't. But what you can do is the best thing you can do is to have an open conversation with your child about anything that they may encounter or a person they may encounter, so that because it's getting to the point where it's when, not if. When your child encounters something or someone that is dangerous, they will speak to you, and you can help them then stop, right? To stop whatever's happening. As a parent, I look for opportunities to do that with my daughter. I struggle with this policy. To be honest, I have a lot of different concerns about it. I thought about voting against it because it's just fraught, just like everything else we've talked about today. It's fraught. But I recognize that we have a law at the state level that we must adhere to. I can't vote against a policy that has that follows the state law, because it's something that we're being required to do. I worry that over sanitizing things, so we go back to my professional experience. The only common denominator in all of the kids that I worked with that had issues with sexual perpetration was that they used pornography. So I get it. I get that pornography is a problem, and I am anti-pornography, straight up. And I have seen, maybe not firsthand because it wasn't me that experienced it, but I've seen secondhand the devastation that can happen when we don't protect our kids. But the other piece of that is pornography is what you make it. Pornography went from hardcore, really hardcore pornography that none of you want to hear about. You've probably never heard of. I hope you've never heard of it. I've seen and heard way too much because of my job. It ranges from that to J.C. Penney catalogs. What is arousing for one person may not be arousing for another person. And so when we have a policy like this, with words like, we need to make sure that immoral things are not in books, according to whose morality are we talking? Whose morality are we talking about? I was raised a certain way, but that doesn't mean that I should be able to choose for somebody else and their child what books are available. Now, there needs to be boundaries on that. I completely agree. But I worry that we are just tightening in and we're losing opportunities to talk to our kids about hard things. We're not legislating, but I'm going to use that term. We're legislating what other people's kids, like I am much more comfortable with the way the policy is that we talked about, because there is an option for you to opt your kid out. If you want to opt your child out of these things, then please do that. But I don't want us to opt out every kid in the district because there's a certain subset of parents or whomever that is uncomfortable with something. I have looked at the different books that, particularly in Utah, and there was a graphic novel with a graphic depiction of a sexual act. I don't want my third grader, I have a third grader, I don't want my third grader seeing that, but I also don't want to remove the book so that nobody sees it. I would rather have a conversation with her about what she saw there than to pull it off of shelves, because that gives me an opportunity to talk to her about what is appropriate, what are our family values. And not only what are our family values, I may have a set of values that she chooses not to subscribe to, and that needs to be okay. I need to give her that opportunity. That's just my own parenting style. And so I have lots of issues about this. I worry about representation because, and I am the first person, I've been in my board reports and stuff saying, we're not the national, you know, we can't be held accountable for what's happening in the nation. But I'm worried that we're going to go the way of the nation, which is the books that are being pulled to be reviewed are skew much more from LGBTQ authors and authors of color and other authors from different marginalized groups. Therefore, more of those books are being pulled from shelves. And I think we have some good mechanisms to make sure that is not happening, but those are just some of the concerns that I have. I really like the full district policy rather than at individual schools, but again, I also worry that what might be, we say we want community standards, right? I have news for you. We have several different communities in Utah, in Provo. And so what might be right for one community in Provo may not be right for another community in Provo. And what the kids, we're all generally dealing with the same thing, but what's in the kids' faces is it's not the same. And for us to want to make a policy to, and again, by us, I don't mean us, school board, I mean us just in Utah, us just in general. It's problematic to me. I'm not saying we shouldn't have some kind of policy, but we had a policy before. I would have preferred that we made the changes on local level rather than having the legislature legislate this for us. I would have liked to have parents come and say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want, and then we make the changes. But it is what it is, and I understand that. I know I've taken too much time. But I have significant concerns. However, I don't feel like I can vote against it because we need this. Legally, we need this. And I'm not opposed to having some standards, but I am very, very worried that we are starting to legislate what is appropriate. We're taking our own values and we're imposing them on other people. And that is problematic. And we need to make sure that we are policing that because that's not a good place to be. Amen.
All right, is there any further comment on this motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor indicate with aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously. So, just a point of clarification, Anne Marie, this will be, it's in statute now as of today, or?
It needs to be posted by tomorrow, so Caleb and his team is ready. I will just take out the markups that we had and it will be on today or tomorrow,
Including the Google Forms?
including the links to Google Forms.
Okay. All right. We have come to a very long day, and I appreciate everybody and the amount of work that we were able to get done today. I really appreciate it. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, thank you.